agenda?
Yes, thank you, Mayor, members of council. For the consent agenda, you have 7 items. Item number 1 is the February 16th City Council retreat minutes. Item number 2 is the March 4th regular City Council meeting minutes. Item number 3 is the closed session meeting minutes. You have the memo at your desk. Item number 4 is the special City Council meeting from March the 11th. Minutes. Item number 5 is the closed session meeting minutes from that meeting on March 11th. This is also at your desk for you to review and the clerk will take up at the end of the meeting. Item number 6 is the approval of meeting minutes from March the 18th. And item number 7 is a budget amendment for ordinance number 13. This is related to the comprehensive land use plan. On March 4th, you approved Serbia as a consultant, Kimberly Moore as a consultant, and Withers Ravenel as a consultant. So this is just to create a budget amendment for these 3 contracts. Whatever you want.
All right, thank you. For these consent agenda items, does anyone have any questions? Okay, that's pretty straightforward. All right, I'll go ahead and call our regular meeting to order. And our invocation tonight.
We need to set the agenda first.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Motion to set the agenda.
I would move to set the agenda with the amendment of item C3 moving to C2 and current item C2 moving to C3 on the regular agenda.
I'll second that.
All right, motion and second, all in favor?
Aye.
All right. Is approved. This time I would call up Joe Lauren to offer our invocation.
Can we pray, please? Father, I want to thank you for the opportunity to gather here tonight. I appreciate these folks and all the homes and families and the different parts that are represented, Lord, that they're able to gather and work on things, Lord, that I'm confident that you're interested in and is part of your purpose and plan. So, Lord, you give your wisdom and guidance and your peace. And, Lord, may everything that we say and do here tonight turn our hearts towards you. And, Lord, we're very fortunate. You watch over this meeting and your will be done, Lord, in all these things. We're very blessed. You're the reason. We thank you for it. In Christ's name, amen.
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 I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Do you have any recognitions?
I'll move to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
All right, motion and second, all in favor? All right, motion passes. All right, moves us on to our regular agenda. We're going to begin this evening with public comment. Now, I would remind everybody, see if we have signed up, that we have 2 separate sign-up sheets, so it looks like I believe everybody has signed up for the appropriate one. Each speaker will have 3 minutes. Please identify yourselves, give your name and address. You should have some lights up there that will be green, yellow, and red to let you know where you are in your 3 minutes. Also, for those of you who have not been here before, we have restrooms through those double doors and water fountains. And I think that's all the housekeeping that we have. Now, I would also remind people, please be respectful to all the speakers, whether they are petitioning or they're here for public expression. Let's try to keep our outbursts to a minimum, or preferably none if we can. All right, so with that, I'm going to go ahead and call our first speaker, which is Mr. Joe Long.
Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. My name's Joe Lawing. I live at actually at 5326 South New Hope Road, Belmont, which is not in the city limits. But I'm here tonight on behalf of myself, but especially our church. I pastor Unity Baptist Church right just a block down the street here. And we had a situation or a thing that we did that involved the city, especially the fire department, about a month ago. And I wanted to take an opportunity and let y'all know and everybody else just what an experience that it was for our church, for me. It started, last fall. I think I contacted Miles Braswell and told him we were interested in demolishing a house that we own on 10th Street that was beyond repair. We want to try to use that lot for something else maybe down the road. And he told me some things that we need to consider, some of the steps that you go through. And during the conversation, I think he mentioned maybe contacting Chief Davis with the fire department, that they may be interested in using that house to practice, which I, for some reason, thought they didn't do that anymore. I don't know why, but when he said that, I contacted Chief Davis, and he got back in touch with me and was really excited about the opportunity. And then he put me in touch with Chief Eisenhower. Chief Eisenhower called me a day or two later, went over a few things. I met with him, me and another man from our church, met with Chief Eisenhower, Chief Hardy at the actual house. He went through all the steps. I had to sign some papers saying that y'all didn't burn our house down without us knowing it or something like that. But we produced some materials that they needed. We had some asbestos removed and different things. And y'all, I just say all that throughout the whole process, which again probably went on for 3, 4, 5 months from start to finish. Those guys in that fire department could not have been any better. They were the most professional, the most efficient, the most helpful, cordial. They did everything and then a whole lot more than I could have ever imagined. A couple of times during that process, Chief Davis called me. A couple of times he called me. I thought, what does he want now? You know, I've known Todd for a long time. He's a good friend. Chief Eisenhower called me a couple of times during that time, but each time they called, they didn't want to know, they didn't want me to do anything or us to do anything. They wanted to know from us if there was anything else they could do. And it was just like that during the whole time. The day of the actual day they burned the house down, they had fire department here, 30-some firemen, instructors from Gaston College. There was a lot of folks from our community and the church that was there. They did that thing in a top-notch manner. Spent time talking to families and kids, explaining things to them. You guys have a top-notch fire department here. I don't know a whole lot more than what I experienced, but I just want to say you're very fortunate. This community is very fortunate. And on behalf of Unity Baptist Church, I just want to thank you. I want to thank the city and the Belmont Fire Department. Thank you very, very much.
Thank
All right, so
you.
we'll move on. Thank you for letting me have that opportunity to train. All right, next up, I believe that is Steve Mason.
Yes, Mayor, I want to appreciate the council for talking to me about this. I'm a grading paving contractor on Mason Grading and Paving, and we just bid a job for y'all down here next to the police department. And there was some things about the paperwork. I had a meeting with one of your guys, and I just misread him about that. He said, you just fill out just one sheet is all we needed this time, and I did. But there was 2 more sheets needed to be filled out. Of course, I already filled them out and sent them to you, but it didn't affect the bid in any way, shape, or form. But our bid was considerably $40-some thousand cheaper for y'all. But we do all the town of Stanley's work, we do the Lowell's work, we do a lot of municipalities with proper license, with proper insured. to do y'all's work for you. We done the y'all's police department, we done the last parking lot on it for y'all. So we just want to know that we appreciate you giving us the opportunity to do it. But, they wanted to take our bid out because we didn't do it, put them other 2 sheets in. But we have put them other 2 sheets in at this time. And it was just information about it, the company and what's his. But that's the reason I come by here today, because, I think y'all gonna look at it tonight. And we've done your other parking lot for you, and I think I can save you some time and effort on some more ideas I've got for you. So I want to look at it if we take this job on for you. So I appreciate your time, y'all let me come up here and talk.
Thank you. All right, that concludes public comment for this portion. I think as everyone heard during our consent agenda, our regular agenda, we have inverted our order. So first up will be the Chronicle Street parking lot project phase 1. I believe our public works director, Jonathan Wilson, is presenting. Let me ask you, do you all hear me okay? I'm never sure where this microphone should rest. Can you hear? Thank you. Thank you for checking.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. At the January 16th meeting, City Council voted to or approved its staff moving forward with this project. At that time, we developed the project manual and put this project out for bid. On March 6th, we issued the request for proposals. That was to gravel the parking lot area with an alternate to pave. On March 26th, we held a bid opening, which 2 contractors submitted bids for the project. The 2 contractors submitting those bids were Mason Grading and Paving and Quinn Sells Custom Paving. In the bid tab, you'll see that Mason Grading had the lower total bid. However, they did not submit the proper paperwork to issue a responsive bid for the project, and therefore staff is recommending to move forward with Quinn Sells for a total bid amount of $149,197.50.
All right. Thank you for that. Council, do you have any questions?
Is this for paving or gravel, or where did we leave that?
The $149,000 does include paving.
Significantly cheaper than last time when we were to do this.
Mm-hmm.
But we're not doing any gutter work or anything like that, it's gonna be surface level code. The way I understand it is, and correct me if I'm wrong, but as long as it's below an acre, is that correct? That's the threshold when we're gonna have to do the curb and gutter and all that, the water, isn't that correct? Seems like there was another qualifier for that.
Well, I think we've removed some of the stipulations.
I think it was, and this might be a Tiffany question, but I think it was if we weren't putting a building on there, then it wasn't subject to the land development code, which is what would impose those restrictions, if I'm right about that. And so,
But in any case, this is for the bid to pay.
Correct. Tiffany, would you like to clarify? She shook her head.
Yeah, she's shaking her head.
Yeah, that's why I can't see.
I would prefer the opportunity to review that question in more detail before I can provide a definitive answer for you. The land development code applies to any new development, that's true. But when it does come to land clearing, I'd want to look at the specifics of what triggers the need to comply with the land development code. I do know that overflow parking is specifically outlined as allowable, but it is qualified as a gravel lot that's allowed for overflow parking. So when we go to paving, there may be some additional requirements, and I don't want to speak to those without having a chance to review the code to make sure I'm fully informing you of all the requirements and triggers.
Do we not need to know those requirements now so that we can build that into the budget for what this project's going to cost?
Well, this project is for less than 1 acre. So
Yeah.
we were designing the bid around our budget. So the way the bid was structured was that you had a base bid, and the base bid was for the gravel lot. And so we put an alternate bid to pave that gravel lot. And so not knowing where the bids may come in, try to stay within our $275,000 budget, We designed it around that, trying to keep it within budget. And so the bids came in where we could select the alternate number one, which was to pave that gravel lot, and that's where we ended up. It does not include the curb and gutter around the lot. It's just going to be pavement and then, parking stalls and striping. It does include, I think, some concrete work that are like the drive apron that comes off the street near the sidewalks. There'll be concrete there that leads on to the asphalt.
That was my recollection.
Does it include lighting?
What's that?
Does it include lighting?
I don't think it does not include lighting, but we could include that. We do have contingency in the project at the amount of, I think, for this project, $14,347.50. So for Duke Energy to come out and provide us with site lighting quotes, then possibly we could cover that through the contingency. We did have $275,000 budget for the project, so since it came in well under that, we thought to encumber the rest of it, consider those other things that we could consider at maybe another park, maybe another project that we could add in and work with the local contractor.
I think that was direction of staff, though, because because we're not gonna have a structure there or some other exception. So remember that we did not have to install curb and gutter for this particular lot. Part of that was the cost, cost that they're not trying to stand to that budget amount of 275. So I think if we include that, would probably be well worth it.
Yeah, so we had considered like any curb and gutter, but if we just want to put curb and gutter in, we've got to consider like how the rainwater would flow off of it. Right now, it's going to sheet flow off the entire site that we pave. You curb and gutter around the whole thing, and we got to consider like storm drainage areas as it outfalls from the parking lot. Could be a consideration with some of the contingency that we have.
Or possibly something we could come back and do later in the second phase.
Could be a second phase, so.
Yeah, and as far as the lighting, I remember our last conversation about this, we wanted to make it kind of time restricted, so, no overnight parking or something like that, so it might save cost there to not have, or need one, but I guess we'll see down the road.
Good point, yeah.
I know we were trying to maximize our surface parking area. You were talking about seeking relief from some of our tree plants and all that. I mean, this is going to be an entire just surface parking area.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions?
That's with it bumping up to the existing parking lot, right?
Right.
I remember we pitched the idea that there was going to be a gap there.
Still gonna be two separate blocks, though, so you can cross over from one to the other.
Like a buffer, almost like a median.
Yeah.
It is not connected.
I know we have been considering controlled access. Is that still in the mix?
I don't think we included any controlled access points. We could include a swing arm gate, if that's what you're referring to. We can do that. With the contingencies we have, I'm sure that we can do that. Swing arm gate, please.
Okay. All right, is there anything else for Jonathan?
So you need a motion, right? I'll make a motion to accept staff's recommendation to accept the bid from Quinn Sales for the paving of the lot at Chronicle Street.
All right, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
If there's not a second, I assume there's some qualms about doing this.
So my qualms are, I just don't think it's needed. I've been against this parking lot from the get-go. I can't justify the price, even though it is under what we had budgeted. I don't think it's using our tax dollars wisely.
Alex?
I think the parking's needed. I mean, again, not to contradict what you're saying, Charlie, but I do think we need the additional parking in downtown. I guess I'm still hung up on the delta for the cost of it, for the $40,000, $50,000 differential on it in regards to one of the vendors versus the other. So I think that's kind of where my mindset is. Again, you think about $50,000, I know we're kind of under budget on this, but still, I mean, we've got a lot of projects on the CIP list that could easily allocate that for those funds too. So I think that's where kind of my headspace is on it. Jim, I guess you also did second it, so.
Yeah, I still don't know if we're clear on, to me, I've heard a lot of different things. Is it gravel or is it paving? And if it's paved, then it does sound like there's some issues that, I always thought it was going to be gravel, and then we could pave it. But I do think there's some issues with paving that, if it's impervious surface, I think there might be runoff issues, and I don't think we're exempt from that aspect of the code. And so I'm just a little bit confused. If we're paving it, do we actually need some more information before we go ahead and do this?
But to my knowledge, I think it's under an acre. There is under an acre. Therefore, it does not require stormwater management.
It doesn't require erosion and sediment control.
Or stormwater management.
Or stormwater.
All right. But it sounded from our planning director as if there might be other complications or uncertainties if we went to paving instead of gravel.
There may not be, and if that's the route you all would like to take, again, this is city-owned property, so it may just be a question of approval. I just wanted to make sure that we were transparent in what the code says, and what triggers it, and without having done a full analysis of the paving option, I just wanted to make sure that you all knew. I'm happy to do that, and if there are necessary changes that are needed and/or special approvals are needed, I can bring that forward to you all. Again, it is a city project. If it is in the best interest of the city, there is likely a route forward to move that even within the land development code. But they are right, it's under an acre. What triggers development and the definition of development in the LDC is slightly different than that, but that doesn't mean that there's not a route forward if that's the vision that you'd like for that lot.
Is the motion still on the table?
No. The motion has been made, there's been no second. The motion will either have a second voted or the motion will die on the
Just
table.
one more question before. Jonathan, can you just kind of elaborate again? Because I just want to make sure we, dot our i's and cross our t's with the staff recommendation, which I trust y'all's recommendation, but I just want to double check because it is like, I think it's like $40,000-$50,000 difference. So can you just elaborate on the decision on why we're choosing Quinn over Mason's grading? I just want to make that abundantly clear.
Sure. So in our bid document, the request for proposal, there are 3 pages that are required to be filled out in the project proposal section. That is an addendum acknowledgement form where the contractor who's bidding the work will sign that they have received any addendums issued to the document, acknowledging that they have those or that there were none. There is a bid form sheet where they actually enter in their bid for the project. And then they have to put their contractor's name, business name, GC license, address, that information. And then there's a third form, which is an execution of bid form. That is giving the city information on their business itself. So they identify whether they're a corporation, an LLC, sole proprietor, those types of things. And then again, the general business information. One contractor submitted all 3 forms that are required. One contractor submitted one of the 3 forms that are required. Therefore, the contractor that only submitted one form was not responsive to the bid, and therefore staff's recommending that we move forward with the contractor that submitted all the forms at the bid opening.
Is that a requirement for the city of Belmont in regards to accepting these bids in the process?
I would say it's part of being a responsive and responsible bidder. Also, like an addendum, so addendum identifies certain things that a contractor may ask, and then we respond with an addendum, answering the contractor's questions, or anybody else who may have questions during the bid process. So we had 2 of those that were submitted before the bids were due. The first addendum really didn't change anything related to like any quantities, any material kind of changes. It was a change, I think, for the bid date. There's a couple more items on there. Addendum number 2, actually, someone asked, how thick should the stone be? And so the answer was that the stone thickness needed to be 6 inches. And so that's a material change. So you would think that a contractor needs to know the thickness of the stone and recognizes that there's an addendum. Because if you don't check the box that you have recognized that there's an addendum out there, you could have bid it with 1 inch of stone, you could have bid it with 12 inches of stone, but we want 6 inches of stone. So you have to identify that you know exactly what you're bidding on and that we're aware of it. So we ask for certain things to be returned. And addendum and acknowledgement is one of them. The bid form that we actually provide is one of them. And we actually ask for a way that bids are written when they send them to us. There's like, we want you to spell it out just in case you make a mistake on writing something out or that maybe we can't interpret it when we're opening the bid. We want you to write it out. We want you to like put it in numbers. I think in this scenario, I think that one of the bid forms didn't even complete that correctly. And so we were considering, that we can waive certain things that may need to be waived. We also ask that you provide your general contractor's license number. And so we go back to see if you're a licensed general contractor. It's one of the things we do, we check on it. And if there's a project that is out to bid and it's over a certain dollar threshold by state law, you need to be a general contractor to actually submit a bid and be the awarded contractor. So we're checking the general contractor's license number for the firm that we're not recommending, and to our knowledge from the state's licensing agency for general contractors, I don't believe that that license is active and current. So we're recommending the low bid that is in Sutton County.
Thank you.
In light of that information, I'll second the motion. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, we have a motion and second. All in favor? Opposed? All right, motion passes 4-1. Thank you. All right, that brings us up to our next item, which is the Major Development Plan 2022-05 Henry Chapel Agenda Memo.
Perfect. Good evening, City Council. Before you tonight, I would like to present Major Development Plan 2022.05 for the Henry Chapel subdivision. The request before us this evening is to develop a 622-lot, single-family residential home community on approximately 275 acres. For the record, the parcel ID numbers and zoning include parcel ID 217840 and 207383, which are both zoned general residential. Parcel ID number 217839, which is zoned suburban residential. And all three of these parcels fall underneath the South Point Peninsula Overlay District. And so as such, all of the parcels are subject to all of their respective zonings, both their base and the overlay. The property owner for these parcels is ASF TAP NC2. And the applicant owner representatives, I just do have a brief correction for you this evening. Moore Van Allen is actually being represented by John Floyd, and he is here if you have any questions for the applicant this evening. And then Turnstone Group, the representative is Jackie Renfro. So, as we get started, I just wanted to review that the applicant is requesting your review and consideration under the Land Development Code that was in place at the time that their sketch plan application was filed. The sketch plan application was filed in May 2017, and this is allowable under the permit choice statute, as well as some of the related case laws that were put in place around the time of COVID that allowed for continued vesting of sketch plans. And so that permit choice statute, for the record, is 143-755A, that again outlines that a development permit applicant may choose which adopted version of the rule or ordinance will apply to the permit or use of their application. So in this case, the applicant has selected the 2017 ordinance in place when they filed. So we don't get these a lot, and I wanted to make sure that we had a chance to review what is a major development plan. So a major development plan is a process, it's not currently in our ordinances today, but it was in place in 2017. And that process allowed for administrative development review for larger projects to be done by city council as opposed to being done by staff. Chapter 2 specifically defined the major development plan as a plan depicting the subdivision of land and proposed improvements and or buildings that combines the subdivision and the site plan review process to show the proposed build-out of a property onto one combined plan. And so that is the type of project that we're asking for your review and consideration of this evening. As was previously stated, this is an administrative type of decision. And so there are statutes that outline how these decisions can be made by whoever is the responsible authority for making them, and in this case, it would be City Council. So in Statute 160D-403, it outlines that development approvals that are administrative in nature are done to the extent consistent with the scope of regulatory authority. And this regulatory authority is further defined in 160D-401, which outlines that these are the regulations that are adopted pursuant to the chapter. These are the development regulations adopted by City Council. So that is the regulatory authority that the project is seeking review underneath here this evening. Any approvals that are issued tonight or any type, whether it's an approval or a denial, all must be done in writing and must contain the provision requiring the development to comply with all the codes. So everything has to be in writing, the reasons why and the codes that they must follow for administrating. So there's no relief is what it boils down to in major development plans. Administrative decisions are just that. These are made in the implementation, administration, and enforcement of development regulations, and they're strictly based off the determination of facts. And the application should be reviewed with objective standards that are set forth in our land development code. So sometimes you may hear these also referred to as ministerial decisions or administrative determinations. And we have state authority to make those. In fact, the state actually outlines the process that we have. It's outlined in 160D-803 under the subdivision regulations, which grants the authority for subdivisions. And again, there's a part of subdivision review contained within the major development plan process that it can be made by a governing board based on the recommendation of a recommending body. So this project has been reviewed by the planning board and is now coming before you this evening for a decision by you as the governing body for this type of development review. So a little bit of background on the Henry Chapel project. This site was annexed into city limits incrementally, but that was completely within our city limits by 2010. And this was done by Crescent as well as Spur Development. In May 2017 is when the city received its official sketch plan application, and that's what triggered the code that we're reviewing the application under this evening. In January 2020, the sketch plan was officially approved. So during this time, staff was working with the applicant to refine that sketch plan and having continuous conversations. In May 2020, the General Assembly extended the term of development approvals, which was all part of the state of emergency with COVID. And what that meant is that the deadline to act on sketch plan approvals extended from July 2020 all the way to January 2023. And so within this time window of development review and application extensions, there was a schematic plan filed by the developer, and that was done in July of 2022. That's when staff received the development plan, major development plan application in our office. So going over the site conditions, again, this site is 275 acres. There is a considerable amount of topography along this site. Elevations vary approximately 120 feet. And those steeper slopes are more concentrated near the streams as well as the southeast corner of the property, although the topo is significant throughout the entirety of the site. There were a couple of wetlands identified as part of the site survey, and you can see those in the darker areas on the screen. That's what looks like maybe a black dot in there. The project is located directly adjacent to the Norfolk Southern Railroad, which is located to the east of this project site. And the entirety of the site contains a mix of soils, including chulaka loam, which according to the Gaston County Department of Natural Resources, can be considered poor for development since the soil itself retains water. So that is the natural challenge of development of this site. The conditions of the site today, while the majority of the site is currently wooded, it's historically been a mix. So on the screen, you can see various aerial photography images going back from 1938, that's the one on the top there. The one to the bottom left is 1968, 1997, and 2022. And so you can see a few different things. There were some patches of cleared area over time. You can see that trees have been incrementally growing. You can also see some access paths going through on those aerial photographies. There's also an old copper trunk cable right-of-way traversing the southern portion of the site, which now appears to be abandoned. So you can see that cut in the lower segment on some of the older aerial photography, but we don't see that here today. And then overall, you can tell from the aerials a little bit, but just a visit to the site and other images we'll go over later this evening will also provide evidence that the surrounding uses for this project site are primarily single-family residential, both residential within the city's limits as well as those within the county's jurisdiction, but primarily still single-family residential nonetheless. There is a church directly across the street, that's Henry Chapel AME Zion Church. And so just to provide you some context there of the adjacency. Overall, continuing on site conditions, we noted there's a pocket of wetland areas on the survey. There's also floodplain and floodway along the streams throughout the site, and you can see that on the top image to the left. And all of these would be subject to, during the construction plan review process, meeting all of our floodplain requirements that are located in Chapter 151 of the Municipal Code. Gaston County is currently, through an interlocal agreement, our floodplain administrator for the city of Belmont, but planning works in conjunction with the floodplain administrator at Gaston County to make sure that these requirements would be met. The entire site is also within Belmont's watershed, although it is split. So half of the site, roughly 161 acres, is located in the critical watershed protection area, and 114 acres is located in that watershed protected area. So you can see that with the blue and the green at the bottom image on the left. That means that the entire project would be subject to compliance with our watershed requirements that are outlined in Chapter 153 within the Municipal Code. And at a really high level, what this means is that in addition to all of the things in there, the applicant is aware and understands that this project would require a high-density development permit during the construction phase if moving forward as proposed here based off of the density and the site conditions and its location. As part of our due diligence, staff also went through some records to determine what we could find out about the site's history. And so I just wanted to provide a brief recap for you here. In 1963, we actually found a tax map that showed a 4.5 acre parcel located in the maybe northwestern corner, right where the two stream crossings diverge. And that deed refers to the area on the project site as the Hill Gold Mines, which is noted in the deed as accessed via an old road leading into the old Leaper Place. So looking further at what does that mean and what is the extent of the Hill Gold Mines, what we found is that there was an early Gaston County settlement map that identified a specific area, that area that's circled in the map on the very right of the screen, as the Nicholas Leaper land. And then further, there was a book in 1951 called Early History of Belmont and Gaston County that says the Leaper mine was worked more than 100 years ago and was considered to be a rich mine. We continued digging. There's no way to know if all these layers line up, but there is a possibility of all of these things kind of accumulating at this project site. There was a book published by the U.S. Department of Commerce and Mineral Resources back in 1927 that noted that the largest producer of gold in North Carolina in 1927 was the Leaper hydraulic mine near Belmont. So it is possible that the mine here at the project site was a hydraulic mine for gold, although we have not been able to do thorough research. These are just our initial findings. So all this information has been shared with the Augusta County Museum of Art and History, as well as the Department of Natural Resources, so that further investigation can be done. Just a few more references to that before we move on. There was an article done in the Banner News in 2019 that gave a little bit more background with some additional research in there, noting that the Leaper gold mine was operated as early as the American Revolution and produced gold in great amounts until it was closed at an undetermined date. So even through the history of the Banner News, it's not determined exactly when a gold mine on this property would be inactive. But confirms what staff's research also found, that if it was in fact on this project site, then it would have been owned by Matthew Leaper, sold to C.T. Stowe, and then inherited by Minnie Stowe Hewitt, all of which lines up with the deed transfer records of this property. The 2007 deed of land from R.L. Stowe to Spur Enterprises still references Hill Gold Mines, and you can see that on the very bottom snippet on the screen as well. So, in addition to the possibility that there might have formerly been a gold mine on the site, and there may be some significance to the environmental things that need to be further refined during construction plan review, we also noted a few other significant things during our analysis, and that is that the survey that was done by the developer back in 2016, prior to their filing of the sketch plan presumably, did note that there were several grave markers discovered that were just to the south of the paved roadway, but still technically on the subject development's parcel. And so, looking at that and then doing some research of the significance of that, it was noted that the burial ground at Henry's Chapel, with its simple gravestone markers, dated back to the 1800s and remains the only tangible reminder of Henry Chapel's humble beginnings. We've shared that information with the developer, and the developer has agreed to, as part of this plan review, dedicate the land where those existing grave markers were identified to the church and or cemetery as part of their process. It's to the south of the roadway, and they've agreed to do that to make sure that they can remain preserved as necessary. So, that's the site's history. Going into zoning and building forms, this site, we went over the zoning a little bit. Just as a reminder, the entirety of the property is falling underneath the South Point Peninsula overlay. The proposed density is 2.2 dwelling units to the acre. The allowable in the South Point Peninsula overlay and the underlying zoning districts, the max allowable, is 3 dwelling units to the acre once those zoning layers are overlapped. What's proposed here this evening is 622 detached house forms, all of which are street lots, and they are not proposing any townhomes within this development. They are providing a 20% variation in the lot widths, so that not all of the 622 lots are the exact same width, and those lot widths range from 55 feet to 65 feet in width. The standard setbacks that were on the site as proposed comply with our standard requirements, the setbacks being 20 foot in the front, 6 on the side, and or 20% of the lot width, whichever is greater, and a 30-foot rear setback. And we do have a front-loaded garage setback of 30 feet as well. All block lengths in the current version of the plans before you this evening have been verified to be less than 660 linear feet, which is a requirement in the Land Development Code as well. As a part of this project's review, they were required to do a tree survey on the site. Again, they were required to follow the tree protection requirements that were in place at the time they filed, so in 2017. So these were the requirements prior to the 2020 update of our tree ordinance, for those of you who may have been with us through that process. So they do look a little bit different, but all of that to say that they were required to prove compliance with the ordinances that were in place. And so this has been confirmed by a qualified tree professional, and a report has been provided that confirms that 31% of the heritage trees located on the property are proposed to be preserved in a tree-safe area, which includes approximately 6,263 trees. And then 37% of the healthy, maturing, deciduous tree canopy is also proposed to be preserved in tree save area, which includes about 55 acres of the site. In total, the current plan includes 71, just a little bit over 71 acres of tree save area for preservation. And what you can see on the right is an excerpt from the tree professionals report that shows the areas in green are what were some of the pine stands, that dark green. The white are the areas that are the proposed tree save areas. You can see those are in the more environmentally sensitive areas along the streams. And then all of those dots are areas where they included on their tree survey in their report. So I believe a representative from Bolton Mink is here if you have any questions about this portion of the analysis as well. As it relates to open space and buffers, they have provided on the proposed plans 26 acres of open space is required, but they have provided 36 acres. Our ordinance says that open space needs to be defined and with a specific type. So these are defined as parkways or greenways alongside with the tree save area. And all of the greenways that are within this plan are proposed as 10-foot wide asphalt paved surface. The plans note that the city has the option to accept them as public corridors if we so choose at the end of their bond period, or if the city does not want to elect to accept these as public greenways, then the developer has agreed to maintain them in perpetuity as part of the proposed subdivision. Along the streams, they have provided a 30-foot stream buffer. They've also provided a 20-foot type A buffer along the railroad as required in the ordinance, and a 10-foot type A buffer to the extent feasible along Henry Chapel Road, separating the rear yards of the proposed homes from the street itself and the visibility from the church across the street. This project is proposed to be phased, and phased as follows: 141. I think I might have messed that up. So sorry. I believe that's supposed to be 127.
Yes.
Sorry, my slide is wrong. So phase 1A, for the record, 127 lots. Phase 1A includes both of the new access points off of Henry Chapel Road. And it also includes the reconfiguration of the access road connecting to Davis River Road, where that would need to remain open in perpetuity because there are some residents that live off of Davis River Road. So phase 1A is proposed to encompass all of those connections and making sure folks can still access their homes. Phase 1B is the yellow on the screen, and that includes another 119 lots. There are no additional access points for phase 1B. Phase 2 includes 203 additional lots, which is linked with the extension of right-of-way from Timber Ridge Road. And the city does have some options for looking at this in the future for limiting access in and out, but our ordinance says that right-of-ways shall connect. So that's why you're seeing that requirement shown on the plans as proposed. It doesn't mean that we can't look at how open and or closed we'd like that access to be in the future, whether it's emergency access or full movement. But you are seeing it shown on the plans because our ordinance does note that a requirement to right-of-way that they shall interconnect. So that is seen there, and that is linked with phase 2, and the access to the properties is noted in blue on the screen. Phase 3, in the final phase, is proposed to add an additional 173 lots. And while there is not adjacent right-of-way directly to that portion of the site, there is a stub out for the potential for a future connection shown on those plans at that location. So the Timber Ridge one butts up to existing right-of-way. The north one at Bowen Holcomb is just stubbed out in the event that that site's ever developed to allow for future connectivity. All of the streets within the proposed development are designed to meet our minimum standards within Chapter 8. Most of the new streets are designed as a 50-foot right-of-way. However, there are some key corridors that are designed as a 60-foot right-of-way, which would allow for enhanced vehicular flows, especially for service vehicles. And you can see those are mainly running north and south throughout the site. So from those points of entrance off of Henry Chapel, those highlighted in red are the corridors that are currently proposed as a 60-foot right-of-way within the design. Regarding utilities, there is a 12-inch water and force main proposed to extend south from the River Mist development into the project site. There's also a new regional pump station to be located off of Davis River Road. That's where you see that red star on the screen in the middle to the right. The proposal includes the abandonment of the Greystone Estates pump station, but that is not until the other pump station is activated and able to handle the capacity and flow there. And again, there is a gravity sewer to drain the basin over to the regional pump station proposed as well as a part of this proposed design. In addition, there's a water main extension proposed along Henry Chapel that you can see all the way down, and it's very light on the screen, my apologies, but it's shown in blue along the roadway itself. Regarding transportation, I wanted to provide you a brief timeline on this, but I will note that following my presentation, Kimberly Horn is also here to provide a presentation specifically on transportation and the items included within the TIA. So I would ask that you allow me to wrap up the report, but just know more information is coming with our consultant following these next few slides. So transportation-wise, there was the first TIA completed in February of 2018. And following the completion of that study, more discussions were held regarding off-site mitigation improvements. And ultimately, there was not a consensus reached between the city and the applicant as to what the mitigation recommendations were and how those could be achieved. Those conversations continued to go on, where we were hopeful to find a resolution between all parties. But ultimately, after a lot of discussion and analysis on both sides, in August of 2021, the city advised the applicant that a new TIA would be required to be studied because of the length of time that had gone by from the time their initial one was done. And so our ordinance allows for a new TIA anytime traffic patterns have changed significantly and or that it's been over 24 months as a primary trigger there. So again, in August 2021, it wasn't right when COVID hit. We were things were starting to activate a little bit again, and that's when we opted to notify them that once cars were getting back on the roads, we would like them to run a new TIA study. So upon receiving that information and then scoping and some other conversations, ultimately the second TIA for the project was completed in August of 2022. And one of the things that is notable about the second TIA is that it actually included the project's proposed phasing. So the first TIA that was done was just for the entirety of the homes within the project and didn't outline that phasing. So there were some notable differences in how that analysis was done that Brady will share with you in his presentation. Once we got the TIA mitigation recommendations, ultimately a TMA, which is a transportation mitigation agreement, was provided to the applicant that listed all of the mitigation that was identified by Kimberly Horn within that study. The applicant then provided for your consideration an alternative agreement limited to only the improvements that they feel can be required by the city based on North Carolina case law, which is not the same list as the one that was provided. Some bullet points on that is that our 2017 ordinance notes specifically that all required measures must be implemented prior to final certificate of occupancy, or that the applicant shall provide a cost estimate to the city for review and provide a payment in lieu for said measures prior to CO. So that language was in the 2017 ordinance. The question before you this evening from both planning board as well as from staff is, what can be required? And does the project ultimately comply with the land development code in this area, or all areas under your review this evening? Our ordinance also notes that the transportation mitigation agreement must be signed by the applicant, the city, and NCDOT if it involves a state roadway. So some of the proposals for mitigation do involve a state roadway. In communications with NCDOT, for the record, NCDOT does not have the authority to require off-site mitigation improvements. However, NCDOT will support or allow them if the city is able to require them. And the applicant has confirmed that there is no commitment at this time to provide a payment in lieu. So there is not a commitment at this time, from my understanding, to provide the proposed mitigation that was included within the transportation impact analysis, nor is there a commitment to provide a payment in lieu option as outlined within the 2017 Land Development Code. In summary, this is a major development plan. The major development plan is specifically defined with the intent to provide a fair and equitable process to all interests, including petitioners, affected neighbors, city staff, the planning board, and the city council. At this point, this project is being presented to you this evening because the schematic plan review has been completed by staff. A community meeting was held to notify everyone about the project. Project notifications have been sent. Planning board has had the opportunity to review this project and provide you a recommendation. And it's now city council's turn to render a decision on the schematic plan. Planning board's recommendation to you, they did meet on February 15th and unanimously recommended denial of the schematic plans as presented under the basis of Land Development Code 16.1 that reads, in addition to the regulations contained herein, the following provisions shall apply to all development plans subject to this ordinance. All development plans shall be designed to facilitate the most advantageous development of the entire neighboring area by protecting and enhancing the stability, character, and environment of the area, as well as because of Land Development Code 16.3 that reads, all development plans shall be required to install or provide the following improvements: transportation improvements to mitigate impacts on safety, traffic congestion, and transportation operations as defined in section 16.14. And so it is with that recommendation that they are asking for your consideration of acceptance of their recommendation, any public comment, and ultimately asking that you render a decision on the schematic plan tonight. I will say that Planning Board also requested that some additional analysis be done prior to your consideration this evening, and included in your packet is a public safety memo that has been provided by Kimley Horn that takes into account existing data that's already available, both from a traffic perspective as well as from a fire, police, and EMS data perspective, as it relates to public safety, as to help you make an informed decision here this evening. So if you have any questions on that, Brady is also here to speak to that memo and any information contained herein to help you with the discussion this evening. And with that, that is all I have, unless you have any questions specifically for staff.
I have questions.
Yes.
That's a lot of stuff. So I want to just focus on a couple narrow things. And I want to start with some questions about the traffic analysis. Most of my questions in that regard are going to be for Brady, but I do have some for you. So you talked about the 2 TIAs that were done by Kimley Horn. Did the applicant also hire its own traffic consultant?
They did.
And what were the applicant's traffic consultant's findings? Were they similar to what was contained in the Kimley Horn TIA?
We had Kimley Horn review the applicant's findings, and it was found that those were not sufficient and or that there were some conflicts in the data points. So I would prefer to allow the applicant to speak to the findings of their representative as well as Kimley Horn on their analysis thereof.
Okay, I'll certainly ask that of Mr. Finkley.
Sure.
If you could go back a few slides, I want to go over some of the provisions of the 2017 Land Development Code. Unfortunately, they're all on these slides, so you don't have to pull your code out. But if you go to the slide with 16.14F.
Oh.
Yeah.
I don't know that I have the reference.
All right, well, it's on the slide, so I know I wrote it down.
I didn't see it the first slide, so let's see.
Okay.
I can grab the ordinance real quick.
All right. We can do it.
I'm ready when you're ready.
Okay, so 16.14F of the 2017 LDC states that all required mitigation measures identified by the traffic mitigation agreement must be implemented prior to final certificate of occupancy, or the applicant shall provide a cost estimate to the city for review and provide a payment in lieu for said measures prior to CO.
Yes,
And I believe you stated that the applicant is not currently providing such a cost estimate.
that is correct. They have not to date.
And they have not made a commitment to provide such a cost estimate at a later date, is that correct?
That is correct. In fact, they have implied that they are not willing to make such a commitment.
And they're not offering a payment in lieu either.
At this time, that is my understanding.
Has the applicant ever offered a payment in lieu?
Yes. they
Please,
have.
can you sort of describe that process and what all that entailed?
Sure. So that process was, from my understanding, part of the additional analysis from the hired traffic consultant from the applicant. And my understanding at a really high level of the proposal was that the estimate included some mitigation, but that would minimize the actual acquisition of additional right-of-way along South Point Road. And in coordination with Kimley Horn, our traffic engineering consultant, it was deemed to be not really sufficient to doing the mitigation that would be in the benefit of the city from a safety perspective.
Do you remember the amount that was?
I believe that it was $2 million.
Okay. Has the applicant ever offered and or committed to offer either a cost estimate or payment in lieu broken down by development phase?
Not to my knowledge, but I will certainly welcome them to correct me if I'm misspeaking on that.
I want to talk about the transportation mitigation agreement for a minute.
Okay.
Now, there was one provided in our agenda packet. Is the one in our agenda packet, is that the one that was proposed by the applicant, not Kimley Horn, correct?
That's correct. It's the version that was signed by the applicant for your consideration.
Right. So the applicant did not agree to Kimley Horn's proposed TMA, is that correct?
That is correct.
And I noticed that the applicant's proposed TMA is only signed by the applicant and is not signed by either the City of Belmont or NCDOT.
That is correct. And the reason for the city's signature not being on there at this time is that the city, well, I will say at least staff, feels like that until there's a decision on the development proposal itself, it would not be appropriate to sign a mitigation agreement agreeing to that, in that if City Council, as part of the major development plan process, has the authority to decide on the validity of the project and this being a component thereof, it would be my position that City Council would make the determination of whether or not it would be appropriate to sign that TMA.
Okay. Just a few more questions. Other provisions of the code, I do believe these are on slides. Section 16.1 of the 2017 LDC. Oops, I think there it was. So
Yes.
that pursuant to that provision, all development plans shall be designed to accommodate and or support existing and proposed public transportation routes and facilities. Did I read that correctly?
It likely says that. I did not put all that full on my slide, but yes.
All right, thank you. In section 16.3 of the 2017 LDC, pursuant to that provision, all development plans shall be required to install or provide transportation improvements to mitigate impact on safety, traffic congestion, and transportation operations. Did I read that correctly?
Yes, you did.
Thank you. So just to summarize, a major development plan such as this is only considered by right if it complies with all applicable provisions of the Land Development Code. Is that right?
That is my understanding.
And based upon the applicant's refusal to make a commitment to either install the mitigation identified in the TIA or provide a cost estimate for a payment in lieu to complete such mitigation, staff cannot determine whether or not the applicant has complied with Chapter 16 of the 2017 LDC.
That is correct. It's staff's position that if they're referring to case law, that the attorney should be consulted to confirm that. The staff's review and planning board's review is done solely on the basis of the Land Development Code itself.
Okay, thank you. I don't have anything else for Tiffany.
Does anyone have any questions for Tiffany while we have her up here? No? All right, questions for Brady with Kimley Horn?
Well, is he going to present?
Yeah,
or just-
presentation.
He does.
Okay.
evening, Mayor and Council. Brady Finkley with Kinley Horn. Thank you for having me here tonight. As most of you know, we are, Kinley Horn is hired as the city's traffic engineer. Just as a reminder, the city of Belmont has a unique TIA policy in which the city hires a traffic engineer rather than the developer hiring their engineer, and so we're representing the city tonight. As Tiffany mentioned, I'm going to cover a couple of reports that have been, a lot of work's been done since 2017, 2018 on this, but kind of high level, going to be looking at the TIA that was done in 2022, the most recent one, and then the public safety memo that was requested by planning board. I'm going to try to keep it high level, but there is a lot of detail, and so I do welcome any questions that y'all have. At the end of the day, I want to make sure that y'all have all the information you need to be able to make a decision tonight. Just really quick on between the 2018 and 2022 TIA, there were quite a bit of similarities, mainly the number of homes. Tiffany mentioned they're requesting 622. TIA is based off of 628, so really not a big difference in traffic. The access configuration stayed the same, and then the primary study intersections that we'll talk about. Also, just for your information, Tiffany did a great job of covering basically everything that you could possibly want to know about on-site. I'll be focusing on the off-site impacts and mainly the transportation impacts to the surrounding network. And then the differences, as Tiffany mentioned, they added phasing. As we talk through these, it gets a little bit confusing because phase 1 is broken up into 2 phases. So it's phase 1A and 1B, then you have phase 2 and phase 3, but there's 4 total phases. We did collect new turning movement counts. The big difference, as most of y'all are aware, is from the 2018 to 2022 is that Belmont Middle School was open. We have a new signal in place at that time, and improvements, signal improvements at that location. We also had a couple of additional approved developments, which was South Fork development as well as Smith Farm. U6150 is the NCDOT's TIP project that was previously funded at that time, back in 2018, to improve the intersection of Lower Armstrong and South Point Road to a roundabout. That project is still in the STIP, however, it's not currently funded. So because it's not currently funded, we did not include that within our TIA. And overall, there was actually a little bit of reduced mitigation from the 2018 to the 2022 TIA. The main difference being the 4-lane widening that's needed, no longer needed to go all the way down to Henry Chapel. There was a little bit lower volumes that we saw post-COVID, as you witnessed during the peak hours specifically. But the big thing is, because you have the new signal at Belmont Middle School, you now have a new logical point to drop your second through lanes, right? Before that, once you get beyond really the Belmont Town Center, you don't have another logical point to drop your through lanes until Henry Chapel, but now you have Belmont Middle School to be able to do that. General notes, the TIA thresholds were met for both the city and NCDOT. The TIA was performed in accordance with the city and NCDOT's requirements, the city's TIA ordinance, NCDOT's policy, and NCDOT's TIA guidelines. Quite a few agencies were involved with both the TIA scoping and the final TIA review and approval, including the City of Belmont, NCDOT, GCLMPO, which is the Metropolitan Planning Organization, Gaston County, the applicant, and Kinley Horn. And the NCDOT ultimately approved the latest TIA Halloween of last year, or Halloween of 2022 actually. And so as we move forward, we're going to be talking about the 2022 TIA. As I talk through it, I'm going to kind of break it into sort of 4 categories, which is kind of how we look at a TIA. We're going to start with existing conditions, what goes into the data collection to build the foundation of the TIA. Number 2 will be the background, the non-project conditions. So we're going to grow our traffic up to the future build-out years. And then we're going to compare that to number 3, which is adding Henry Chapel into build-out conditions. And then we determine that delta impact, and that's what we mitigate it based off of. And ultimately, what results in our mitigation. To start out with existing conditions, we collected traffic counts on Thursday in April 2022, included vehicles, pedestrians, and bicycles. We did collect counts that included the afternoon school peak hour as well. And so we collected counts, I believe, from 2:30 p.m. until 7 p.m. And we identified the peak hour was actually 5 to 6. And so our PM analysis is based off of that 5 to 6 p.m. time frame. Our AM is based off of 7:30 to 8:30. Our study intersections that we'll be talking about are along the South Point Road corridor from Lower Armstrong, where it turns at 273, all the way up to R.L. Stowe and Nixon, including most of the major intersections along the corridor there. You'll also see number 4, number 5 there, which are the internal intersections within the neighborhood of South Hill Estates. And that is due to what Tiffany discussed as the required connection that we're required to make, at least to assume for the TIA purposes within that neighborhood. Now as we go to background conditions, we grow that traffic really into 2 separate buckets. So the first bucket being non-specific growth, and that's really all of your general growth that you see. And a lot of that traffic, especially in this area, is traffic that's added from the development in upstate South Carolina that's getting added through the corridor as they go to north to Charlotte and to 85, as well as other regional growth that is not specifically identified in the TIA. So that was at 2.5% per year. And then we also looked at 6 approved developments, which I'll show on the next slide, that we took the traffic from and added that to the existing conditions. You add those together, and it came out to about 6 to 7% growth per year along the corridor. The approved developments that we included within the TIA, as you can see here, the Belmont Town Center. And keep in mind, these were developments that were approved but not fully constructed at the time that we collected the counts in April 2022. So we had Belmont Town Center. Most of it was constructed, so we only include 10% of that, the town center there. Then we also had Smith Farm, River Mist, Amberley, South Fork, and Happy McLean. The other component that we look at in future non-project background conditions would be funded transportation projects. Unfortunately, in this corridor, currently there are no publicly funded transportation projects. We already talked about U6150, that was previously funded but no longer currently is. So there were no transportation projects, public transportation projects that were included within our TIA. You'll see a number of other ones in there that are included in the physically constrained Metropolitan Transportation Plan, the 2050 plan, including South Point Road widening, the South Fork Parkway, and the Catawba crossings. But again, those are not funded, so they're not included within our TIA. Now we'll talk about the site. I think you already know the site access points, but in Phase 1A, we assumed 2 full movement access connections to Henry Chapel Road. Those were assumed to be the primary access points as indicated by the applicant. And then in Phase 2, which is actually the 3rd phase, we assumed the connection to Timber Ridge Road, which indirectly gets you out to Forest Hill Road, the South Hill Estates neighborhood. That was included in our TA as indicated by the city at the time that said that it was required by the city ordinance to provide that secondary access point. As we talked through the mitigation, there was a lot of consideration as we thought through that. Of course, we would not want to promote a lot of traffic through that neighborhood. And so, but the challenge with it being the first access point, the most northern access point where most of your traffic is coming from, creates some challenges with trying to force people down to use Henry Chapel instead. So we'll talk through our considerations as we got into mitigation. Here's what the phased trip generation looks like. We have Phase 1A, 1B, 2, and 3. I'll really kind of point you down to the bottom row, which is the full build out. So full build out in the AM peak hour. You 628 homes generates 397 total trips. That's both in and out. And that is in the 1 hour peak AM, and then PM 559. As you look through that row, just I want to point out that those are cumulative, so you're not looking at 397 added in phase 3. That's the total full bill. Site traffic distribution, we take those trips and then we assign them outside network. Here's where you are very familiar, but just want to reiterate it as we look through the lens of how this type of development and this traffic is unique to this area because we're on a peninsula, which is very unique to the Charlotte area, where you don't have alternate connections. A lot of times if you put developments within another, say, in Charlotte, if one is constrained, it's like water, they'll find other ways to get places. But unfortunately, no pun intended, but because of the water that surrounds the peninsula and there's no east-west connectivity, they are all forced to the same spine road that's currently over capacity. And because it is residential, that traffic, about 90% of the traffic is going to want to go north, which in the morning, that is already the problem, right? Northbound in the morning, PM southbound. And so the proposed development would be adding traffic impact specifically to those movements that are already overburdened. Now we'll get into mitigation. So as we looked at mitigation, in summary, we did identify mitigation at all 70 intersections along the South Point Road corridor. In phase 1A, we were looking at a turn lane down at Henry Chapel Road, as well as a turn lane on McKee Farm Road. In phase 1B, you start to get into improvements up on the northern segment. So it's a 4-lane widening from R.L. Stowe Road down to McKee Farm Lane, and that's really needed to facilitate dual westbound lefts coming from R.L. Stowe to turn south onto South Point Road. As we get into phase 2, that 4-lane widening then continues down to Belmont Middle School and is needed to carry through that intersection for capacity purposes and then drop about 500 feet beyond that intersection. And the other, a couple of other improvements in phase 2 would be the signal that is now warranted and needed at the Henry Chapel intersection with turn lane improvements, as well as a turn lane down at Lower Armstrong and South Point Road. And then in phase 3, it's really turn lane extensions. So I do have more slides later on if y'all want to get into more detail on those. That's kind of high level, the mitigation we're looking at. So that kind of concludes the TIA portion. Now I'll focus on the traffic safety evaluation that was requested by the planning board a couple of months ago. At that meeting, there was a lot of discussion around, what are the safety implications of adding this development without providing the improvements that are recommended in the TIA. And generally, it's going to be less safe, right? But I think what the planning board was really wanting to understand is, can we quantify the safety implications by looking at 2 scenarios, one being put in the site and not put those improvements in. And the other scenario is put in the site and put in the improvements that are recommended in the TIA. So comparing those 2 scenarios, which I'll be calling scenario 1 is as proposed by the applicant. So that's really no mitigation improvements along South Point Road corridor. Scenario 2 being as recommended in the TIA. So that is with those improvements we just discussed along the South Point Road corridor. And then we looked at, they discussed wanting to see really 2 areas of public safety evaluated. One being the expected crash frequencies between those 2 scenarios, particularly fatality and injury crashes. And then the second one being impacts to response times to first responders. So I'll start with the predictive safety analysis. And so we looked at a predictive method of estimating the future expected average crash frequencies along the corridor between the 2 scenarios. And this is based off a method that's provided through the Highway Safety Manual, and it's a function of traffic volumes, roadway characteristics, which is your laneage improvements, and then existing crash data, which we had from, I believe it was May 2019 through April 2022, so 3 years of crash data. So basically, to sort of normalize what the corridor could be predicted as based off of past crash data. And then that compared the expected safety performance of those two scenarios. In general, this is really the summary of that. So what this table is showing is the difference between those two scenarios we talked about, looking at predicted average crash frequency of 30% less crashes, less total crashes, if you put the improvements in, essentially. And 40% less fatality and injury crashes if you put those improvements in. So it's comparing the scenario 2, which is with the TIA improvements, versus scenario 1, which is no improvements along the supplement road corridor. And that really comes out to about 4 to 5 total crashes per year, difference of, and about 2 to 3 fatality or injury crashes per year. Another thing I'll note is kind of if you're looking for sort of a baseline relative to how that compares to current crashes. Based on our 3-year crash data in 2019 and 2022, there are about 14 reported crashes per year. The model's showing that there should really be more crashes, basically what it's saying. So you'll see the 18 number up there. That's really showing, based off of the traffic volume, the roadway characteristics, is saying there should be about 18 crashes, and we're seeing about 14. And so if you normalize that based off of the crash data that we have, is predicting 15 total crashes per year under scenario 1, and about 10 to 11 crashes per year under scenario 2. So said another way is it would be predicted to worsen, get less safe under scenario 1. It would actually be predicted to get better in scenario 2. So the safety along the corridor, again, would be expected to improve if the development were to move forward, but you provided the improvements that were recommended in TIA. And then this is just another look at just the northern segment, where we are recommending the 4-lane section, so really Arlstow to about Belmont Middle School. And what it's showing is that carrying to background conditions, scenario 1 increases the total crashes by 7% and fatality and injury crashes by 28%. So basically that's leaving the corridor as is, but you're just adding the traffic from the site increases, would be expected to increase the crashes by those percents. In the scenario 2, would be reducing the total crashes by 33%, reducing the fatality and injury crashes by 40%. Again, that's just a northern segment. That would be one of the corridors. All right, and then the second component that we looked at was response times, impacts of response times for first responders. We received a lot of great data, really timely data from the city's fire, police, and EMS. We did a lot of discussions and review of methods to try to predict the impacts of first response times, like we did with the safety that I just discussed. Unfortunately, there's really no predictive method to accurately quantify those expected response times, and that's really because of the urgent and the variable nature of first responders. And so when they respond to emergencies, they're not typically following the predicted behaviors that we look at when we're in our traffic engineering studies, especially during peak times, because they're trying to just get through and try to get somebody to move over, and there's a lot of variables going on. It's really hard to predict that. And so instead what we did was we looked at a number of related items that were provided by fire, police, and EMS, as well as other analysis that we did looking at increases in travel time along the corridor, and also looking at sort of a review of the corridor itself to see where can folks get off to understand what kind of impacts there would be. And so I'll show what that looks like in the following slides, but in general, what it indicated is that the average response times already exceed the desired response time goals for the city of Belmont. And that was provided in fire report that I believe came before City Council a few months ago. And that's scenario 1, which is moving forward with the development without putting improvements in, would further increase those local response times. A summary of that is really provided here, but there was some really great data that was provided in the fire station location analysis report. One thing I want to highlight is that they had mentioned that 4 minutes is the national industry standard in Belmont Fire Department's desired goal for their travel time. So that's not full response time, but what we're talking about here is really traffic related. So it's that travel time once the wheels begin turning on the fire truck, so when they respond to the emergency. And so that goal is 4 minutes. Their average travel time over the 3-year study was 6 minutes and 49 seconds, and so they're already about 2 minutes and 49 seconds beyond their desired goals. A few key takeaways from that report as it relates to scenario 1, which is moving forward with added traffic but no improvements, really boils down to these 3 bullets here, which is increased congestion, increases response travel times. There was, I believe, a quote within that report that says the increased response times are a result of the added congestion, the increased congestion within the city. Increased service demand, so you're adding more homes to respond to, could reduce the ability to immediately respond, increasing response times. And the third bullet being increased congestion at intersections that are not improved increases the expected crash frequencies that we just talked about, which then increases both your service demand, because now they have to respond to those crashes, and your response travel times because crashes produce congestion. And then finally, just some other related data, we looked at travel times along the corridor, South River corridor, and this is standard vehicular travel times. Your 2 main peak times that we focus on northbound in the AM is about 72% higher travel times projected under scenario 1 versus scenario 2, and then southbound during the PM about 79% higher travel times under scenario 1 versus scenario 2. And then we did a desktop review of the existing corridor and found that roughly about 50% is currently lined with roadside elements that create challenges for folks to quickly pull over and allow emergency vehicles to pass. Under situations where there's heavy rain, that increases to 80 to 90%, where folks will be pulling over into grassy areas and could get stuck in mud. And so, additional through lanes and turn lanes will provide safe areas to be able to merge over, to add lanes and add turn lanes. So I will stop there. I've got some really detailed slides that we can get into if you want to, or we don't have to. That covers how we identify mitigation at intersections. But I've got to stop there and answer questions.
Jim, just real quick,
Yes.
a real quick one. Brady, can you flip back to that other slide? Because I just want clarification on this. So, just as I understand it, with the proposal as today, with none of the off-site improvements, with the on-site improvements that they're talking about, mitigations, we should really say, you're saying that AM is going to go up 72% by our models, and PM is going to go up 79% for travel times. Is that correct?
When you compare the 2 scenarios.
Okay.
Right.
So I have some questions. How are you, Mr. Bigcook?
I'm great. How are you?
Did you have a good Easter?
And,
Well, I was spending about 10 hours over that weekend reviewing your 85-page TIA and 10-page traffic safety memorandum twice. But as you might imagine, I have questions to ask you about it.
Sure.
But before we really get into the TIA, you might recall from our discussion with Ms. Farrow that the applicant, they hired a traffic consultant that performed their own analysis. Do you recall that?
I believe there was actually two.
Okay. And did you have an opportunity to review those that were prepared by the applicant's traffic consultant?
Yes.
And what was your impression of them? Did you have any issues with them?
They were different. So the first one was, I believe, in 2020 that reviewed the 2018 study that we did have issues with. The second one was maybe a year ago that reviewed this study and basically said they agree with our findings based off of the current ordinances, policies, and guidelines.
So you had issues with their first analysis. There were some inconsistencies there.
Correct.
Did you have any issues with their proposed proportionality of identified intersections?
Yes.
Can you elaborate on that?
Yes, I feel like it was misrepresented. Some of the proportionalities was looking at the percent of impact to certain maneuvers, whereas I'll use an example. So at Henry Chapel, that's an unsignalized intersection. We typically look at the level of service and delay based off of the South Street approach at stop controlled intersection, because typically the through movement has no delay. It's really just your focus on the stops, Henry Chapel side. The percent impact was really based off of the percent impact on South Point Road, which of course they were, traffic was turning onto Henry Chapel and off of Henry Chapel, not going through on South Point Road. Whereas I feel like you should be looking at the percent impact to the delay on Henry Chapel.
But you say the second analysis that their traffic consultant did, which critiqued your 2022 TIA, that essentially agreed with your findings.
They agree that from a technical standpoint that, yes.
Okay. Now, you prepared a transportation mitigation agreement after conducting the 2022 TIA, correct?
Correct.
Has the applicant signed the draft transportation mitigation agreement that you prepared?
I don't believe so.
Okay, thank you. Now I want to ask some questions about the TIA itself. I'm generally going to stay at a higher level. I'll leave the details, I think, for some of my colleagues with a couple of exceptions. But I believe in both your presentation today and in the TIA itself, you stated that Belmont is uniquely situated. So can you sort of just reiterate what's unique about Belmont for purposes of conducting a TIA?
Yes, it's the only area around Charlotte that it's located on a peninsula. So even if you're next to a river on one side, you still have ways to go east or west one way, whereas on the peninsula in Belmont, you don't have that option to go east or west. Traffic in general, it's like water. If a pipe is filled, it'll find other little cracks to go. When it's on other cracks to go places, it's all forced to that same pipe that may already be congested.
In your professional experience, are the conditions existing along Belmont's peninsula like any other municipality which you have performed a TIA?
Can you say that again?
In your professional experience, are the conditions existing along Belmont's peninsula like any other municipality in which you have performed a TIA?
It's similar to other congested corridors, but the uniqueness is that there are not other places to go.
I want to talk about a couple intersections now, and I don't think we need to, I think we can go through this without turning to any detailed slides, but on page 30 of your TIA, you're discussing, I believe, the intersection of South Point Road and Forest Hill Road. And it's stated, based on input from the applicant, the intent is to design Access 1 and Access 2 along Henry Chapel Road to serve as the primary access points for the development, with Access 3 Timber Ridge Road as a secondary access. Does that sound correct? And furthermore, the intent, and I'm assuming this is the intent of the developer, is that by signalizing the South Point Road, Henry Chapel intersection and leaving the South Point Road, Forest Hill Road intersection unsignalized, the majority of the proposed site traffic would utilize the signalized intersection at Henry Chapel Road, leaving access 3 on Timber Ridge Road as a secondary access. Is that correct?
Correct.
And that was sort of what we were talking about how you wanted to get people down to the signalized intersection.
That's right.
Well, but the applicant is unwilling to pay for the signalization and other recommended improvements at the South Point Road, Henry Chapel intersection. Is that correct?
Yes.
If the South Point Road, Henry Chapel intersection remains unsignalized, is that likely, in your opinion, to increase the use of access 3 along Timber Ridge Road as a site access point?
Yes.
What would be the impact of increased use of access 3 in the South Hill Estates neighborhood?
It would send a lot more traffic through that neighborhood.
So by refusing to pay for any intersection improvements at South Point Road and Henry Chapel Road, is the applicant undermining its own stated intent to design access 3 along Timber Ridge Road as a secondary access point?
It would be inconsistent.
Thank you. Are the intersection improvements identified by the TIA triggered by the anticipated trips being generated by the 622 single-family homes in this project?
628 based on the TIA. Yes.
But otherwise, yes.
Yes.
Now, the point of this or any other TIA is not to hold this applicant responsible for all problematic background conditions at a particular intersection. Is that right?
Correct.
Rather, the TIA only requires an applicant to offset the impacts caused by its particular development and restore the intersection to the background conditions it would experience in the absence of that development. Correct?
Correct.
In your professional opinion, are the mitigation measures identified in the TIA what is necessary to offset the proposed development's transportation impact to the applicable intersections?
Yes.
Thank you. I now want to turn to the traffic safety memorandum that you issued on March 19th of this year. And I want to maybe ask my questions from a different angle than a lot of what you talked about, because I sort of like to approach this based on their scenario 1, not necessarily versus scenario 2, but versus background conditions on build-out. Based on your analysis, will the applicant's mitigation strategy result at build-out in more total crashes along South Point Road than would otherwise be the case under background conditions?
Yes.
And of those additional crashes, more would involve injuries and/or fatalities than would otherwise be the case under background conditions, correct?
Yes.
And your analysis examined only the intersections included in the 2022 TIA and not the entire stretch of South Point Road from Nixon Road to Armstrong Road, is that correct?
Correct.
So there could be additional accidents in that corridor.
Right.
Based on your analysis, upon build-out, and I believe this is in a slide, but just to confirm, the applicant's mitigation strategy will result in a 7% increase in total crashes along the portion of South Point Road from Nixon Road to just south of the middle school, and a 28% increase in crashes involving injuries or fatalities than would otherwise be the case under background conditions. Is that correct?
Correct.
And based on your analysis, upon build-out, the applicant's mitigation strategy will result in a 34% increase in total crashes at the South Point Henry Chapel intersection and a 93% increase in crashes involving injuries or fatalities at that same intersection than would be the case under background conditions. Is that correct?
Can you repeat that one more time?
Yes. Based on your analysis, upon build-out, the applicant's mitigation strategy will result in a 34% increase in total crashes at the South Point Henry Chapel intersection and a 93% increase in crashes involving injuries or fatalities at that same intersection than would be the case under background conditions.
Correct.
Thank you. Based on your analysis, will the applicant's mitigation strategy result in increased traffic congestion and cause response times from police, fire, and EMS to increase?
Yes.
And will such an increase in response times negatively impact the ability of police, fire, and EMS to quickly respond and arrive on the scene of potential life-threatening and other emergencies in a timely manner?
Yes.
And average response times already exceed the city's desired response time goals, as you stated, is that correct? And presumably 628 new homes would increase service demand for first responders, which would further increase response times, is that correct?
Correct.
And the increased crash frequencies that we've already gone over and that you've discussed in the memorandum, those would further increase both service demand and response travel times due to increased congestion, is that right?
Right.
In your professional opinion, will the development plan as submitted by the applicant result in unsafe conditions upon build-out?
Yes.
Thank you. That's all I have.
All right, are there any other questions?
Witness may stand up.
I have a few questions for Brady, but I actually needed to preface that with clarification maybe from the applicant about timeline.
Okay, we have a short presentation we're going to give, but I'm happy to try to answer your question now.
Yeah, just a one-off, if you don't mind. So in your application, I believe the original timeline for the phasing, you had phase 1A completed 2023, phase 1B 2024, phase 2 2025, and phase 3 2026. Obviously, we're now here in April of 24. Not going to see, if the project were to be approved, not going to see any build out this year. Would you agree that if we state that the earliest build out would be 2025? Can you follow that same?
So I'll ask
That's okay.
Jack, who is a representative of developer as well.
I think it just depends on the length of this process, and so, if we are approved tonight, I think that's still a possibility. However, most of the discussions back and forth with staff have taken a long time, as you can see from our time, to get to this point, and so I think it's just really dependent on how these meetings progress.
But would you agree at the earliest, the phase 1A would not be built out before 2025? Okay. So if we follow that same sort of methodology through for all 4 phases, we'll all be looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of at the earliest 2028 before the entire project would be built out, correct?
I think that's hard to speculate at this time. There's certainly a possibility. There's a lot of demand in the area, and so it just depends on how quickly those homes can sell.
Okay. All right. That's all I have to add. I have a few questions for you. So, based on the presumption that with where we are now in April of 2024, and if this project were to be approved and we adopt that same sort of phasing schedule, by my math, we're looking at around 2028, at least, at the earliest, before the project would be fully built out, if it follows that same sort of phasing. Is it fair to state that the TIA from August of 22, which shows substantial variance and recommended offsite improvements as compared to the TIA in 2018, at this point itself does not fully capture the projected number of trips and congestion that would be expected at the projected build-out date, which is now 2028 at the earliest? Would you agree with that?
It would increase some.
Okay. In addition, is it also fair to state that the background traffic volumes, that is, the baseline volumes generated just through the surrounding growth without the Henry's Chapel project, also are not fully captured in the 2022 TIA and would be higher at the new build-out date of 2028 based on your 6 to 7% growth rate for AM and PM peak times. So your baseline as well as your baseline plus project volume would both be higher. Would you agree with that?
So maybe I misunderstood your first question. I was thinking that question is what I just answered. So your first question was about the existing counts then?
Yes.
Okay. So your existing counts, if we recounted them, would be, they may be higher or lower, hard to say, but.
Based on that same methodology with the 6 to 7% growth rate.
The background.
We can track that to 2028 at the earliest. Presumably those numbers would be higher. Those values would be higher.
That's most likely. It would depend on some of the approved elements that we assume.
Right.
Are there some that are no longer moved forward? Are there some that may be added?
Okay.
And just real quick, Jason, because I think to that point, it's important to note what's already been mentioned, that there's no approved funded projects for this area
Right.
that could contemplate any type of benefit to the analysis itself. But it just want to call that out.
So then, based on those two sort of presumptions, would it also be an accurate deduction then that the delta between commute times, police, fire, and emergency response times, crashes, fatalities, etc., with and without the recommended improvements, which are already dramatic, would be even greater if this new timeline were factored into the 2022 analysis?
Maybe a little bit, but not as much, because the delta would still be the traffic impact of 628 homes, and that traffic generation is static, no matter what it starts now or it starts in 2028. But your baseline would be
The baseline
increased.
would be higher.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Well, which is what those commute times and response times are all based on, right? That's one of the elements of the math and
That's correct.
computations, right? Great. Okay. That's all I have.
All right, at this time, are there any other questions?
I do, and thank you, Barry, but it's more geared towards Tiffany. Sorry, I just wanted to kind of capture everything before throwing some out, and I think Jim, again, kind of did a good job there. I think I can strike off half my page there. But I do think it's kind of important to give at least a little bit background. I think you did a great job of understanding the TIA itself. We say that like it's just common language, but
Sure.
just to kind of, to preface or to begin with, we're discussing here, understanding what the 2017 land use plan is telling us, the land development code, and how we can interpret that, right? So I did just want to cite real quick in chapter 1, and it's bullet point number 2 there, so 1.2, the purpose of this. And again, I think it is important to understand this in regards to the purpose of this ordinance is not merely to provide the minimum regulations necessary to facilitate safe and orderly growth, but also to ensure that growth forms an integral part of the community. So I want to kind of start this to say that the land development code in the beginning in chapter 1 defines to us that we must be looking out for the safety for the public. So I wanted to kind of segue into section 16.14, which is within the TIA for the 2017 Comprehensive Land Use Plan. Because even in the definition, it says traffic impacts and how to mitigate them are an important consideration for our community when significant development is proposed. Public policymakers, citizens, and developers all make a stake or have a stake in understanding and responding to additional demands on the transportation system. A traffic impact analysis, or as we all call it, TIA, is a tool used to evaluate the incremental impacts on the surrounding transportation infrastructure and how to mitigate them to maintain a safe traffic and transportation operation. So again, I want to kind of go back to both of these. It's clear to me anyways, but the LDC is telling us that safety is an important factor when considering this. So again, time to tee it up to you. The reason for the TIA, there's kind of two reasons, right? Particularly in this code. If it's under, what is it, 1,000 travel counts? Is that what it is?
In the 2017, right, it was 1,000 daily trips or 100 peak hour trips, either in the AM or PM.
Okay. And because this exceeds this requires the TIA in this land development code, correct?
That is correct. And just of note, actually, the TIA ordinance was added into our code in 2017, but prior to the initial filing of this project sketch plan. So it was in there,
Yeah.
but added because the city felt it was important to analyze the impacts on safety and the transportation network. And so we added in early 2017 the TIA language into the land development code with stricter standards than what is required by NCDOT.
Perfect. And not that it applies to this particular case, but they have since changed even additionally to accommodate the growth that we have today in the most current comprehensive land use plan, correct?
On the peninsula, there are different thresholds today for TIAs and when they're required. But in other areas of the city, they remain consistent with the thresholds that were in place here. But for this project specifically, it was reviewed with the thresholds of 1,000 daily or 100 peak hour trips.
Correct. And so
kind of, and again, I don't want to kind of prolong it because you did do a good job, but just from a very high level, all right, so it's above the 1,000 mark there, so it's required. The analysis is conducted, the recommendations are done by our consultant, correct? Walk us through from that point in time, that is then presented to the development team, correct?
So the development team is in the room at every step of the process. Once we decide that a project hits a threshold for transportation analysis, the first step is actually to hold a scoping meeting, and Brady did a great job in his presentation explaining the parties that are normally involved in those conversations. So a scoping meeting also includes the developer or the applicant to sit down and understand the phasing of their project and or the impacts, what's changed, how many homes, right? Where are the access points? All of those things are discussed in a collaborative dialogue at a scoping meeting up front. Then there's counts that are taken normally, and then Kinley Horn does their analysis. That analysis is then shared with staff, NCDOT, and the applicant as well. And there is normally, in most cases, and I believe in this one as well, an invitation for a follow-up conversation with all parties prior to make sure that everyone understands the analysis within the document.
Okay, perfect, thank you. And then at that point, just to kind of go, there's kind of two ways you can go, at least how our code represents it, is perform the traffic mitigation that we have presented or the payment in lieu, which Jim was kind of alluding to, I believe, correct?
That is how it's written in the land development code, yes.
And this developer, again, I know Jim and I already pointed this out, but I think it's important, they are not doing either of these, is that correct? And today?
That is my understanding. What they have communicated with staff is that they believe, based on subsequent case law, that they are no longer required to do them, and so therefore are no longer committing to do them.
Okay, all right, thank you. Again, I just thought it was important to understand the TIA itself. Again, the reason for it,
Yes.
safety, we have it in the definitions right here and clearly in front of us. So I, again, just wanted to kind of emphasize that as well. So,
Yes.
thank you, Tiffany.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? Okay, I'll tell you what, at this point, I'm going to exercise a point of privilege, call for a 5-minute recess. Allow everybody to get some water and then go to the bathroom. We'll reconvene at that time. I think we'll hear from the applicant, and we'll have public comment related to this. So, stand adjourned for 5 minutes. All right, at this time, I'm going to go ahead and call this back into order. We have heard our staff presentation, we have heard from Tim and Warren. I believe the developer has finished our presentation for us. Just go ahead and call him up.
Good evening. My name is John Floyd. My business address is 100 North Tryon Street, Suite 4700, Charlotte, North Carolina. I'm here tonight representing the developer, Turnstone Group. I'm joined tonight by a couple representatives of the developer, including Jackie Rincarell, who we've heard from earlier, and Jake Bachman, who is one of our design professionals. Ms. Farrow is working on pulling something up that I asked her to, but I can continue. As Ms. Farrow mentioned, this matter is before you for an administrative decision on a by right development. And the key question is whether or not the development meets the requirements of the 2017 Land Development Code. I think Ms. Farrow's presentation, her staff report, and her presentation, reasonably summarize what this development is. And I think, as you've heard tonight, I think the issue is traffic. That's where we disagree. Not so much what the traffic impacts are, but what the developer's responsibilities are with regards to this. Our view is that the 2017 Land Use or Land Development Code, the provisions regarding traffic mitigation violate North Carolina law. They violate federal constitutional law, and that the mitigation that was requested of the developer violates your own ordinance. Now, I have provided legal analysis to that to Mr. Parks Wilson, your town attorney. Went back and looked at my email. I actually started talking to Parks in 2019 and first met him in 2020. I think it was a couple of weeks before COVID shut down. So we've been dealing with it for a pretty long time, and have put a lot of thought into the legal issues. My understanding is that he has shared our position with you, and the legal precedents on which we rely for our position, and I don't have any interest in putting on an oral argument for you on what U.S. Supreme Court precedent says. I don't want to numb your brains with that. In general, we think North Carolina case law essentially says that you cannot require a developer to make off-site roadway improvements. You can, by statute, charge them a fee in lieu of making those improvements. That fee in lieu must be based on a formula that takes into account the trips generated from the development, and then constitutional principles establish that any exaction, in this case the fee in lieu, has to be proportional to the harm that is caused, or the impact that is caused. The developer sought to address these issues with your former planning and city staff, made several proposals to try and resolve it. That included a $2 million fee in lieu payment, making up to $2 million in roadway improvements selected by the city, widening South Point Road within the existing right-of-way, so that you would have essentially a third lane that you could reverse flow depending upon the morning or the afternoon. All those proposals were rejected by your prior city staff. We also submitted a formula for calculating the fee in lieu that we believe met North Carolina and constitutional standards, and it also went nowhere. Consequently, the developer moved forward with filing their application. And again, we believe that it meets all the requirements that are legally permissible. I do want to kind of explain quickly, when we talk about proportionality and what an appropriate calculation might look like, dig into the details just a little. If everyone would, if you have copies of the TIA, if you want to turn to page 50, there's a table 6.1, and I was hoping to pull this up. I'm not sure if I can zoom in at all. Good way to do that. So this is essentially a chart that estimates what the delay is going to be at a particular intersection at a point in time. And if you look at kind of the columns on the right-hand side, this particular is the South Point Road and Armstrong Road intersection. The columns on the right, EB would be eastbound, and WB is westbound, etc. And then down the left-hand side, you've got kind of 2022 existing. That is what the TIA estimates is the delay at that intersection existing as of 2022. If you look under that EB, this is the AM peak hour, it says the level of service there is an F. That's not good. And the delay is 85.4 seconds. Then you go down under phase 1A, level of service background. That means without Turnstone doing anything, they don't build a single house, your delay there remains an F, and it goes up to 192.5 seconds. If Turnstone builds phase 1A, it goes up an additional 6 seconds. Go all the way down to 2025 background, the level of service there again is an F, and you're talking about a delay of 242.7 seconds. If you add in Turnstone's build out, it goes up to 266. So again, without Turnstone building a single house, you've got a 242-second delay just by virtue of the additional traffic that is going to occur here. This might be the only thing that the people in this room agree with me on tonight, but the fact is, you need improvements there regardless of whether or not Turnstone builds its development.
That's a lie. Phase 1's built out.
And so when you talk about what a fee in lieu looks like for a developer, the improvement that has been proposed actually decreases the delay by 122.4 seconds. But the delay caused by Turnstone is only 23.5 seconds. And so that has to be taken into account. That's what proportionality is. The position of the developer was never, we don't have to pay our fair share. It's that what you don't get to do is lump on us all the costs of improvements for a roadway system that already needs improvement. And your ordinance reflects that. If you look at section 16.14 G17, it says, the applicant will be expected to mitigate only the impact caused by the proposed project, not required to mitigate the inadequate background delay. And that is the issue that we have had throughout this process. It is that city staff, former city staff, don't want the people here to think that I'm looking at them, but former city staff was unwavering in that the developer had to do all the improvements that were identified in the TIA and pay for every single cent of those improvements. And that simply is not fair. That simply does not meet the proportionality standards required by the Constitution. It does not meet the legislative requirements of our state statutes. And so we don't dispute that you needed traffic improvements. It was just about what are you trying to charge us for? And we reached a point where we said, we can't reach an agreement on this, you're being unwavering, and we're moving forward. And that's why we're here tonight. Again, we don't think that those statutes meet constitutional and statutory requirements for the reasons I've expressed to Mr. Wilson, and I believe he's expressed to you. And so we ask that you approve the project. Happy to take any questions that anybody has.
I have a few questions.
Sure you do.
So I've met you before, and you are an attorney with Warren Van Allen, and you say you're representing the developer. Can you sort of walk me through? I'm a bit confused. Who is the project owner?
Turnstone Group is the project owner.
All right, and how does Turnstone relate to I think ASF TAP?
Is that
I
just
think
a
that's
single
the-
purpose entity that owns the property? Yeah,
What's that idea?
it's just a single purpose entity that owns the property.
Who is a single person? Yeah, okay. And you're saying that Turnstone is the real, I guess, de facto owner of the
I
property?
think that's fair to say. Yeah.
Okay. So I think you've sort of gone through, what was it?
I'm sorry, Turnstone is the manager of that entity.
Ah, okay, of that ASF.
Yes.
Okay.
Would you just mind my grab a bottle of water real quick?
Go ahead.
Are the American?
Okay, folks, let's go ahead and be respectful of the speakers and their time. Public expression on this issue is coming up.
So, I think you've explained, you previously offered a payment in lieu, is that correct?
That's right.
And I think you've explained why it's no longer on the table and you in fact withdrew it, is that correct?
I think we moved forward with filing out the application based upon the fact that city staff would not agree to any of our proposals.
And the payment in lieu that you previously offered, how did you go about calculating it?
I didn't go about calculating it. We had a traffic engineer who looked over the 2018 TIA. I don't believe they ever actually did any review of the 2022 TIA, contrary to prior statements, but they looked over the 2018 TIA and estimated based on kind of the work that we believe needed to be done without including right-of-way acquisition, what the reasonable cost of that would be.
Well, it's interesting that you say that. So I believe you did mention your correspondence with the city attorney, Mr. Wilson. Did you author a memorandum addressed to Mr. Wilson that was dated January 10th, 2023?
I don't recall whether that was a specific date, but I did author a memorandum to Mr. Wilson.
And does this memorandum state that it's the applicant's position that the cost of design, right-of-way acquisition, and utility relocation could not be included in the calculation of any payment in lieu?
Yes, that's true.
And is it still the applicant's position that any payment in lieu should not include those items?
Yes, I think state statute specifically says it would be, the payment in lieu should include construction costs. It does not, and if you look at other language within that provision, it says, but the money can be used for, and then it identifies design, right-of-way acquisition, and other things. So the statute clearly provides a distinction between what the developer can be charged for, but what the funds can be used for.
And just one last question. I think it's fair, is it fair to say, and I think you actually have said, that any payment in lieu previously offered would not have accounted for the costs of design, right-of-way acquisition, and utility relocation?
I think that's correct, yes.
All right, that's all I have.
Are there any other questions?
Thank you all.
All right, so at this time, we're going to go into public comment. We'll remind everybody, you have 3 minutes. Please identify yourself and your address. And the first person we have up is Amanda Memory.
My name is Amanda Memrick, and I live at 104 Timber Ridge Road. I'm here today not as one individual, but to represent communities that have come together yet again asking to be heard. For 2 years, we've come before City Council to share valid concerns about protecting groundwater, preserving the watershed, and guarding public safety from an influx of unmanageable traffic. In 2022, I learned that my cul-de-sac street in South Hill Estates would be opened up to provide a cut-through for the 622 home development, altering a neighborhood that has been serene since the 70s. I soon learned that the problems don't stop at ground level. The proposed development is in a critical watershed and critical mineral area that could impact the groundwater of more than 125 neighboring private wells. With the mass grading required of this hilly, tree-covered site, groundwater could be impacted as the soil is exposed to oxygen and heavy minerals are released. This site is similar to the geology near Allen Steam Station down the road. Remember what happened to people's wells there in 2015? Heavy minerals were released, making well water undrinkable. What happens to our property values when our well water becomes unsafe? My neighbors on Henry Chapel Road face similar issues concerning well water and more traffic than roads can safely handle. But at least my neighborhood's name wasn't stolen. Henry Chapel's AME Zion Church has existed for 150 years, and the cemetery holds marked gravestones dating back to the 1850s and several unmarked graves. The Henry Chapel name has history behind it, but someone who knows nothing about that history wants to use it for profit. Has this developer exercised due diligence? Have they walked the property? Have they seen the stream and the deep ravines? Have they looked at the old gold mine? Do they know the bedrock those hills hold? Or did they just see a big empty piece of land on a map and decide to put a high-density development there? Has the developer reached out to neighbors? Have they tried to get a sense of these communities? This Atlanta developer has no ties to Belmont. They don't want to be good neighbors. Instead, they insist on following ordinances in place in 2017 because they can. Even in 2017, however, there are still rules requiring building in a critical watershed and requiring an adequate environmental survey. The developer shouldn't be allowed to bypass these regulations. If they aren't willing to provide proper documents before work even starts, how can you trust that they'll actually follow the rules when construction begins? The residents of Southfield Estates, Henry Chapel Road, and Belmont have compiled their concerns into a presentation that clearly outlines several glaring issues with this development. The next few speakers will be presenting this information, and we urge you to listen carefully. Examine all the issues about to be presented. Weigh whether the benefits outweigh the costs, and then vote no. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, prior to calling up our next speaker, I had a small announcement to make while we have a short break. There are some folks here on staff. You may see with clipboards. If you would like to sign up to be part of our comprehensive land use plan update, see one of these folks and put your name down. All right, with that said, our next speaker is Chris Harden.
The council again here. I'm actually speaking on behalf of many of the neighbors. They've asked me to help out. I got drawn into this by Juan Logan's son, who is the next door neighbor, but I also know the area very well. So it's part of the reason I'm speaking up.
Give us your address.
723 Wood Lily Drive.
All right, thank
And
you.
that is in Belmont. And I happen to know the area around Henry Chapel Road very well. A little bit of background, I just want to emphasize again, the citizens really want to be listened to. This is what we're giving out, that we'd like to see it actually in the public record. As we put these documents in, we'd like to see you have this and represent it somehow to Belmont. We want it entered into the public record, not just put the file somewhere with the city. What I also like to do in background, I actually had a unique situation where I went ahead and was at Allen Steam Station several years ago and saw the unique groundwater there before the actual hit. It's amazing similarity to conditions, and look at the lesson that Duke learned there about where to not put materials or do mass grading. So there's some historical evidence, there's practical kind of old man kind of stuff, very unique. Also was there when Duke Energy decided not to fix Dan River. And I looked at, it was a very similar kind of chin. We don't need to do that, okay? And look what happened with Dan River. Okay? I also got the guy down the hole to fix it, and then Duke Energy realized, oops, we made a mistake. So watch these things, be legally correct and practically wrong. So I really would like to hit this thing of the residents of Henry Chapel Road. There are concerns. I think the traffic has really been addressed well tonight, very clear. Impacts to drinking water, traffic density, environmental justice issues. I'll share a book here later on. Who has heard of this book, Footprints on the Rough Side of the Mountain? It is a reconciliation between the city of Belmont and the African American community from 1993. This was sent to me, personal copy from one of the authors, Mr. Caprice, hands, signed personally. He died in 2020. When I got this, I got chills. I think we have to look, there are conscientious issues here. And this is also to the development that we also have to listen to. So I'd like to go ahead and hit that. I'd like to go ahead and just ask that we be listened to, and we really want to help the developer make a good informed decision also. Okay, so those are key items there. It's the going forward. You'll see these main topics, second page in. Okay, we're going to cover some adherence to Belmont standards, significant environmental impact, evidence of critical minerals. I'll explain what that is. It's all over. It's actually confirmed by the gold mine being in the area. Significant environmental justice issues and a positive approach. This is actually for the developer and the council. There may be a way to turn this into a watershed protection area that would provide value to the developer and also help the town of Belmont and both of them avoid legal action. There's a middle ground here that we think is very possible. And the common sense and sustainable development.
I'm next on relinquishing my time to Chris.
All right, Mr. Logan,
Thank
you
you.
yield.
Okay, so we noticed there were conflicts with Belmont County, state, federal law on watershed protection. This was from chapter 16, the watershed protection provisions in the ordinance. This is on the second page in, the third page in. You see that? Take precedent over all other provisions of the ordinance with regard to density, open space dedication, and built upon areas. That is an item an overlay district may or may not, probably has a very low probability of trumping that ordinance because it's a state law and a federal law. So you really have to look outside case law in North Carolina on the surface, and you have to look at Clean Water Act, downstream intakes. There are risks that are probably well beyond a lot of people in this room, and there are environmental lawyers who understand that. So I would definitely encourage you to look at that. Environmental survey, not an EIS, that's on state property, have been required from the developer and essentially required the sketch plan review. That is actually in your ordinance. Environmental survey, so you don't have these conflicts and thinks everything's okay. Environmental survey is not environmental impact. That is actually in your ordinance. So when that goes on, and you don't know this, we would strongly encourage seek outside help. I actually got a call from senior level people at NCDEQ. Brandon Cosner is ready to assist. She will not assist unless she's called in. She can't just jump in and do something. She was called in to the citizens around here, and by Duke Energy on the Allen side, she will come and she knows the geology in this area very well. Okay? Assistant Director of DEQ in Mooresville. Definitely a resource, and she can direct you to other resources. Interpretations of the city engineer and Belmont I would, as someone who does percent impervious, there seems to be something missing. I'm not sure that what your city engineer verified was correct. It does not appear correct to me. The planning board is saying that basically if it's not in your ordinance, you can go ahead, there's no way to stop it. The planning people, yes, but you really have to ask for outside help again. If you don't know something, you have to ask for outside help. And that is actually in state law. So then we go into this evidence of critical minerals. This is actually a key point. And this is clean drinking water. You look at it, you've got that page there. Evidence of critical minerals, that is, that's what the gold is. With the gold goes chromium, arsenic, all sorts of heavy metals. And what are all those? The pH drops and it goes into groundwater. They are carcinogens. There are studies by North Carolina, Charlotte, several folks right down within a half mile of the site, very similar geology to Duke Energy. That's why they made them pull all the coal ash out. But it's not caused by the coal ash. It's caused by the change in pH. A minor change in pH caused by mass grading releases all those metals. You see the arrows here?
Time has expired.
Who's next?
Laura Engel.
I defer my time to Chris, please.
All right, Ms. Engel yields.
All right, so if you look at that, the arrows, there are over 125 residences with drinking water wells right next to the site. We're talking like 100 feet away, 200 feet, up to 500. That is within the zone of influence of those wells. It goes, well, how does that all get in there? The fact is that it's clean drinking water. It can influence our property values. It's within the zone of influence once they start grading. Okay? It opens everything up. It opens up a can of worms. Significant environmental impact. There's also, we talked about the critical watershed and heritage trees. Another comment. I'm not going to delete that right here. If you want to come to some other points more clearly. I'd like you to look at the pictures here. You see the ones with those rocks? Those are from the site. Gathered by citizens. I did walk out there with supported by citizens. These were all over. There's what's called pluviations. Bedrock squeezes up to the top in critical mineral areas. You would not believe the ravines. We strongly encourage the developer to walk the site with their consultant because they may find there's quartz bedrock everywhere that will cost them a fortune to cut. You're there. Quartz doesn't last very well. Walk the site, get some test borings so you don't get any problems. Do you understand the whole thing with changing pH? What's going on? what goes on, as soon as it's exposed to oxygen, the pH drops. It's called the redox reaction, high school chemistry. When that goes on, those heavy metals get attached to the water particles and go easily into people's wells. See how it works? Not hard at all. It's the reason they're having to pull the ash out of Allen. So how does this happen? Basically, change in pH. What caused it at Allen was the coal ash and all the water. Here, it would be the mass gradient. Turning the next page, you guys see the pictures? This is actually, you see, there's one of the typical coal ash pond, and there's one of the development of, what is it? The one off Armstrong Park, the Del Webb. That, and it can be caused by red runoff. When it lasts more than 3 days, it's caused by a pH change. The reason it's okay at Del Webb, that neighborhood, is because everybody's on city water within 2,000 feet. Here it would not be. So I did a little calculation. This is really for the developer to listen to also. It's not, this it actually is required by state law. There would be about a $1.8 million risk to hook everybody up to clean water. You have to do their septic and their water. Number two, you've got about $15 to $20 million risk, discounted by 50% for loss in property values. People typically don't like to buy houses that have impacted wells. So who will pay for that? That could come to Belmont, could come to Gaston County, even though I think they're stepping in, okay, in a very big way. It could come to the developer, okay? So those are all risk items. These things here show the pH. We already have a shallow well, about 100 feet, has a pH of 5.3. Look at the ferret content all the way up. All the other wells are fine. Nice hard water at 6.5 to 7. You go ahead and mass grade, just like we're talking of, you're going to have issues.
Kathy Ryan, I convey my time to Chris Harvey.
My name is Ryan Yields.
All right, this is the last thing. I really would like you to look at this. I know it's tough for the city staff to sometimes find historical records. Guys, this was given to me. Footprints. There's only about 100 copies. When I got this, I got chills. When it was signed by Mr. Priest, Mr. Priest's hand, this is a personal signature. He died in 2020. Guys, this is a reconciliation between Belmont and the African American community. Somebody sent this to me out of the blue. I wanted to speak tonight, and I said, oh no, now I gotta speak. Guys, there's deep heritage, there's history. This tells you, for the planning staff, all the history that you might have missed. It tells you where to find it. And guess where it is? Where? In people's homes, churches, and Belmont Act. There's plenty of history on this, and on that neighborhood. You gotta go find it. Boy, it's right in our backyards. So I would strongly recommend that. Now, I did say about a positive thing. There is a much better approach to low density here. This could easily be developed as a watershed protection area. And I know that there's something like this up in Mount Holly. They have land that they set aside in a sensitive area. They can trade credits. So you have higher density in one place and do it another way. This could be a thing where the 2/3 separate sensitive area could be turned into a watershed protection area. That would have to be purchased. The other thing is the other third could easily be an assisted living center, which tends to sell at very good prices for land. Okay? Very good prices. I would say look at a more sustainable approach that protects that extremely sensitive area that is also upstream of 2 drinking water intakes down less than 10 miles. We don't want the developer and or Belmont to be responsible for impacting water and not seeing the unintended issues. So it is issue of legal potential impact to the developer too. They haven't looked at this. Would strongly encourage them to walk the land. Would strongly encourage them to get some test warnings and not just look at the surface, because that's where there's a lot more risk there. So what I would say, the answers, I would say vote no to this now. Number 2, though, sit down with the developer, bring some outside experts who can go ahead and give them some land value that is sensible. Also, I can tell you, I need to say this, but SELC, Environmental Fence Fund, has called for citizens already. This has got on the radar. If you get caught on that, you saw how energy thing's a big issue. Look what happened to them. This could destroy reputation of developers and anybody. We don't want that. Why not do something common sense, set the land aside,
become a hero developer who does sustainable development and go ahead and do maybe an assisted living center with a fraction of the traffic. To me, it sounds like a good idea.
Is that the conclusion of the presentation? Okay, thank you. All right, next up, I believe we have John Ryan.
I was gonna yield too, so I'm good.
All right, I believe our next speaker is Chris Lewandowski.
Good evening, and thank you for listening to the talk. With everything that's speaking to the mic.
Can you go ahead and give us your name and address as well?
My name is Chris Lewandowski. I live at 16 Bourne Drive. I'd like to present a thought to the committee. All of the parks in Belmont are up in town. There's a perfect area, Section 3, I know because I live right on it, that is a beautiful forest. It would make a beautiful greenway public park, not one with trails in a community where people might want to go in publicly, and I doubt that the community would like that. But it's a beautiful area. A public park in the south end would be nice to have a picnic area, playground, walking trails in this end, since it's developing so quickly. And so I just wanted to present that thought to the committee and to the people here, that there might be a place in the land that's being proposed for development as a community. There might be a place for a public park in that area. And I want to remind you, Belmont will be a vibrant, multi-generational community that incorporates small-town charm and heritage with an entrepreneurial spirit. Thank you.
All right, our next speaker is William McLean.
Our questions have been answered, thank you.
All right. Next speaker would be Al Hanks.
Paul Hanks, I live at 610 Davis River Road. A little over a year ago, a group of residents on Davis River Road met with Turnstone, and we gave them some concerns that we had about this development. One was Melvin Morgan's driveway, which they don't show on their drawing, and he's going to have to make a significant move of his driveway. They've had a year to come up with an alternative, and they've not replied to that concern. They're moving Davis River Road, but they have not consulted with any of the residents about moving that road. And it's a right-of-way road, and I don't know if they can legally move it without agreement or not, but they certainly haven't contacted the residents. The third thing is this property, just as it's been mentioned, is very topographically challenged, and it's protected watershed and it's critical watershed. They have made, they were asked, how much dirt are you going to have to move to flatten this land to put in this kind of density? They don't know, or they haven't told us. So they are not doing the engineering that should be done in order to go forward with a development in a critical watershed with enough information for y'all to approve it at this time. The one other thing that we asked them about, we have a culvert under Davis River Road that is marginal. It's subject to flood. It's never washed the road out. But before this development could go in, I feel like that culvert needs to be improved just to protect the road, because there's only one access to these homes on Davis River. Thank you.
All right, our final speaker is David Epos.
David Epps.
Sorry, that looks like an O.
No problem. My mother said I have terrible writing because she was on the Catholic school. My name's David Epps. I live at 54 Bowen Drive. I'm immediately adjacent to this development proposal. I'm down a little bit further down. Bowen Drive is one of the roads that wasn't included in the traffic impact analysis because we don't live in the city of Belmont, we live in the county. But guess what? Every one of those cars comes right by my road every day, to the point where I plan my day where I don't go out in the morning, I don't go out in the afternoon, I pick a time in the middle, which I can do. While I support property rights and development rights, there must be consideration of the neighboring properties along with the community in general, regarding the future use and development of that property. My hope is that you've heard from a lot of the people here tonight and the residents about the traffic, the safety along South Point Road, the surrounding side streets, and the South Point Peninsula. Yes, we live on a peninsula. I think we've heard that enough tonight. I'm a licensed professional geoscientist with over 40 years of experience in the environmental field. Environmental investigation, environmental remediation, groundwater problems, challenges. That's my job. That's what I do for a living, and I've done it for over 40 years. The thing that I don't understand, that I haven't heard, even this is a site plan development, but your own staff have told you that the soils of this property are not good for development. What's going to happen when these guys plow this land down and this soil becomes even less good for development? Not only that, but the recharge that it provides to my well that I use for drinking water, along with all the other people that live along my road that also rely on groundwater to supply their house for drinking water. I'll tell you what I think it means when they do this, is that you're going to see a lot more runoff. You're going to see a lot more runoff of oil and grease. You're going to see a lot more runoff of phosphorus that people use in their gardens and on their properties. They said they used a 25-year storm to model this. 25-year storm doesn't count for anything anymore. 50 or 100 years more likely. My experience tells me that there's going to be impact to the groundwater. I can tell you that from years and years of seeing environmentally contaminated sites and what they do. This hasn't been investigated. It's incumbent upon you all to think about that, and as you make your decision tonight, to understand that the residents that live here, the residents that are ones that are going to feel the impact of this development, are the ones that are going to have to live with it. Are they going to be required to post any kind of bond at all for future impact to my groundwater? I don't think so. They'll be long gone by that point. You know, Stowe Park is one of the things that brought me to this town over 25 years ago. It would be wonderful if we see another park that's just, someone just said, down and have a Henry Chapel public park. It would be wonderful to do that. Find a way to do it. You know, a long time ago there was a song that was put out. People don't know what you got until it's gone. And they paved paradise and put up a parking lot. Please don't let that happen to our town. Please don't. Thank you.
All right, at this time, we have had our public comment. We've heard from staff, the developer, Kinley Horn. That being said, I think it's appropriate to go ahead and ask for a motion at this time.
I move to deny the application based on traffic safety and the other evidence in the record.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
All right, motion passes. Thank you. All right. Folks, let's go ahead and allow us to continue our meeting. We still have reports and other business to begin with. I don't believe we have any reports, is that correct? Okay, so other business, I'm going to go ahead and begin this charge. So Please be quiet while we're reading.
So, since our last city council meeting, there's been a few events that have taken place in Belmont, and I just wanted to kind of ease the tension on this meeting, highlight some of those very positive things that have gone on in Belmont. So back in March, we had the St. Patrick's Day bar crawl that was put together. That was spearheaded by Eileen English. I thought she did a phenomenal job. She really did a lot of the legwork, and she brought that to the city, and I think that deserves some type of acknowledgement. And she also had the help from Belmont, North Carolina, Belmont NC Living, Belmont Beyond, the print shop, which I understand she told me did the shirts for the bar crawl, then Belmont Local, and then Belmont, North Carolina Acting. So again, I just want to say that I thought that was an excellent bid that she did most of the legwork on, and I just want to congratulate her for that. Then the other one was the Easter Festival that was taking place in downtown Belmont this past weekend. My family, my wife and kids, we went to it and we had a great time. And I wanted to just give some kudos to the people that put that together, because I know that's not easy. So Phil Bogan and team, with Cassidy Lackey and Summer Gilbert. And then Phil stated that he had help from a slew of other people, and I want to make sure that they get acknowledgement for their hard work and volunteerism, such as Jennifer Church, Susan Martello, Alexander Martello, Frank Martello, Georgia Weiss, Quinn Weiss, Giovanni Basta, Jane Crane, Kelly Tracy, and Dewey Vlad. Again, I wanted to take time for this city council meeting. We had some high tensions here, but I wanted to kind of end on a high note with some kudos for the great work that's going on in Belmont.
All right, thank you. Alex?
Yeah, I'll be brief. Agreed with Charlie. Again, I wasn't able to participate in the egg hunt this year. I volunteered 2 years in a row. Couldn't do it this year because of a baby shower for my wife. But I do want to thank the staff, the volunteers, from the information I heard from the residents. It seemed like it was a great event. Real quick, I do want to thank staff again also on this one too. It seems like the ballpark light situation I brought up at Davis Park seems to be resolved. Moving on to the tennis courts, maybe we might want to just, it was the most bizarre thing. It was, I can't remember, it was that day that it was raining all day, right? So we were at Maddie's grandparents' house, I live right down the street. And for some reason, the tennis lights were on all day, and no one was out there. So I don't know what happened there. I don't know if it was a malfunction, but just curious about that. I mean, maybe it's small, but cost savings there, not to run lights during a rainstorm out there. Other than that, again, I'd like to thank all the staff and presenters this afternoon. I mean, this was a very detailed presentation, so again, thank you all. And that's all I have there.
Thank you. Just a couple things, and perhaps Richard or Jason might be speaking to this as well, but I was asked the Keep Belmont Beautiful cleanup, which is scheduled for April 20th. There's going to be a change of location this year. It's going to be in Reed Park rather than Stowe Park. So I just want everyone to be aware of that. Come out to Reed Park on April 20th for the cleanup.
What time is that?
Yeah, I don't know. 9 or 10. I don't want to misspeak. I just wanted to speak to the location. Yeah, and there might, I heard that some of the street lights might be out on Main Street. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, we've been dealing with Duke Energy to determine what the problem is. So they've been out, there's several of them that have been out for quite some time.
Okay. And the only other thing, again, in respect to the proceedings that we just had, I believe under the code, having denied the application, we need to set forth the reasons in writing. So I'm assuming that the city attorney will be handling that. Okay, that's it.
Jason?
Just a couple of updates from our quarterly meeting yesterday. The mayor and I participated on the Transportation Advisory Committee, and we had a quarterly meeting with DOT yesterday, and we were working through some requested improvements with them, that our city manager is in communication with them on just, minor things right now. We have certainly our laundry list of major things that we asked them for. But we are looking for some improvements to some of the signal synchronizations at 2974 and Park Street, as well as 2974 and Highway 7 at the Bojangles intersection, some other four-way stops, some restriping at some particular intersections. All this obviously is to promote, better safety and better traffic flow. So some of those improvements should be forthcoming in the near term. I would just add that our city manager knows I would have never done this as a kid, and I'm going to wish our Wolfpack fans in the room well Saturday night. I know that we tuned in, and
I will not.
I'll be pulling for it too.
I will not.
Go back.
I just have a couple things. I wanted to congratulate the Belmont Farmers Market today. They just opened up for their first farmers market, and they were super successful. There was a lot of people down there, and I enjoyed getting to be a part of that as well. But seeing everyone come from town, and I love the new location where they put all the vendors. It was really nice. So congratulations to them. They did a great job, and all the volunteers that helped today get back up and moving. And then I wanted to revisit, possibly at our next workshop, a citizen that has issues with their backyard with an open storm drain pipe. That's something that I want to discuss, and I just want to make sure that I have it on record that we definitely revisit that. And then
One more thing, Richard, I'm sorry. I know I'm not trying to drag this on because I have to go to the beach tonight, but Miles, question. And it doesn't have to be tonight, but curious an update on the progress for transportation bond that we discussed at the retreat. Just curious because I know that it was kind of a tight timeline there.
Yeah, I can give you an update now. So we engaged Gannett Fleming. We've met with Gannett Fleming, I think 3 weeks ago right now, and that was our kickoff meeting. The goal was to have the actual projects listed, prioritized, and then estimated to bring back to you all before June 3rd. June 3rd is the date that we'll have to set the resolutions that would lead into to be on the referendum for a vote in November. We do plan to meet with Gannett Fleming for our next meeting, which is next Friday. I think that's the 12th. Next Friday the 12th. Someday next week is when Gannett Fleming is coming back with their first round of cost estimates. So staff met with them, and we talked about all the improvements and shared with them pedestrian master plan, our power bill projects, some of the projects that everybody kind of knows about that needs improvements around the city. And so they've got the full list. That's the next step, is to prioritize and determine like how much you all would like to move forward with the bond. So I think we're going to put a deadline by June 3rd. So we had to get that list in front of you all, present it, show you our rankings, see if you agree, and then kind of talk about the actual dollar figure for those.
Cool, thanks.
All right, and then I'll add, Keep Belmont Beautiful is in Reed Park. It is 9 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. That is April 20th, 2024. And I'd like to go ahead and reiterate for those here and those at home watching, to be part of our comprehensive land use plan. You can sign up here. Update. I'm sure there's a way to sign up online, or am I overseeing?
It's more challenging, and I still haven't signed up.
Okay, so it is possible. Apparently, it's more challenging. So you may want to sign up in person.
Of course, if you're watching at home, you would not be able to sign up in person.
Of course not. But it's on later date.
Yes.
We may need to look at the possibility of our Park and Rec Advisory Board meeting dates.
that was my second thing. I apologize.
The possibility of they meet on Wednesdays, which is a difficult night for some to attend a lot of church services on Wednesday night. I've talked to a few folks, spoken to a few folks, and Tuesday or Thursday, with Tuesday possibly being preferred day, as I understand it. So if we could speak to our board, I don't know what the process would be to amend that date, whether that is a council decision, a board decision, or a joint decision. But we need to check everybody's availability and try to amend that if possible.
What's that? The follow? Yeah, I don't know off the top of my head.
Okay. I would also like to take a minute to thank everybody for their time on this. This was a long meeting. There was a lot of data and detail to go through. I know staff spent a great deal of time going through this. I'm sure the petitioners did as well. But also want to acknowledge council. I mean, I know how much time that you put into going over these documents. I did speak to Councilman Heffer, and his Easter weekend was pretty much spent going over these documents. I've gone over them. I think everybody, all parties exercise their due diligence. That is all I have, and with that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn, second.
Motion and second, all in favor?
Aye.
All right, we stand adjourned.